Welcome to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Today we have most people joining us in the committee room, but we still do have some who are going to join the meeting virtually. For their benefit and those watching the webcast, can I please ask members to briefly introduce themselves? I've not been advised of any substitutions today. So if we start with Mrs. Fryer.
Jonathan Morgan, my division is Loughborough South West.
Terry Richardson, representing Narborough and Whetstone.
James Poland, Syston Foss.
Trevor Pendleton, Kegworth and Castle Donington.
Simon Galton, representing Lawn Division.
Max Hunt.
Thank you, members, and I'm Michael Mullaney, Chairman and County Councillor for Hinckley de Montfort. Finally, before we begin, can I please remind everyone to only turn on their microphones when you're invited to speak to avoid feedback when others are speaking. So item 1 is the minutes from the last meeting held on July the 12th. I move these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Yeah, okay, thank you. And item 2 on the agenda is public question time. I've not been advised of any questions from the public for this meeting. Next, item 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order 7. Again, I've not been advised of any such questions for this meeting. Item 4, urgent items. We have no urgent items. Item 5, next we have declarations of interest. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I give a declaration of interest in agenda item 11, as I am a director of the LEP board? And can I also give a declaration of interest, both personal interest, in agenda item 12, addressed to note that I'm the current chairman of the Members Advisory Group.
Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, as Councillor Richardson, I'm a director of the LEP, and that's my only declaration.
Thank you. And Mr. Pope.
Just to confirm again, probably for those watching, that those are borough councillors automatically goes on the declarations.
Yeah, in respect of items 11 and 12, we'll record the usual interest for those members who are also district councillors, which I think is almost everyone. Does any other members have any other interests beyond those already raised? No. Okay, so item 6 is declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No. Item 7, I've not received any petitions. Item 8 then is the first substantive item, which is the medium-term financial strategy latest position. Members will also have received a supplementary agenda pack containing the report to be considered by the Cabinet later this month. Our comments made on this item today will be reported to that meeting. Declan Keegan, the Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, is with us for this item. We also have the lead member for Resources, Mr. Brecken, joining us in the room this morning. Welcome, Mr. Brecken. And Declan, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report's in 3 sections, so if it's okay with you, what I normally do is do each section and pause for questions to break it up a bit. Okay. So the 3 sections of the report is the latest revenue position, latest capital position, and then just a bit of an introduction to the MTFS refresh. So turning to the revenue position first, this is at period 4 of the current financial year. And the position we've got at the moment is £6 million better than the position that we displayed in sort of the P2 position that was reported to Cabinet, but this still means that it's a £12 million overspend, and the impacts of a range of areas. In the interest of time, I'll just focus on the overspend areas rather than going through every variance in the report. So the first area of overspends is a high needs block. Now in the MTFS, we did account for sort of a £6 million spend over the grant. You know, it's been a historic problem, and a problem expected to continue for the future. While we're making savings, grants are still going up. It's still not at the pace that the demand for the service is going up. Unfortunately, that's increased by £3 million to a £9 million overspend, as there continue to be sort of exceptionally high levels of demand for support for high needs. Now, additional capacity has been added and continues to be added to make this, I suppose, providing the support cheaper than sending pupils out into sort of just purely independent settings. But unfortunately, the demand is such that there still is a usage of independent settings that is increasing. So that reduction needs to be targeted. But in truth, until we get hold of the demand and get that down to more sustainable levels, this will be a continued problem. Moving the next big overspend, and the one that is driving really the 12 million overspend overall, is adult social care. And there's been little change compared to the 13 million pound that was reported sort of previously. And what we've got is the sort of the dual impact of the number of service users being sort of continuing to be very, very high, but also the average costs of sort of supporting these service users, both in the home care, sort of people receiving care in their own settings, and for the people placed in residential settings, both at sort of high levels. And the belief at the moment is around home care, it's primarily because as people are discharged earlier from hospital, they need additional support, which isn't a surprise. Over the course of the last year through COVID, we got a lot more funding from the NHS. But that funding was time limited, but both people who were discharged last year and people who've still been discharged early still need sort of high levels of support than what we previously did do. There's also a bit of an impact on home care because both as part of the department's strategy, but also again because of an impact of COVID, there's less people in the residential care settings. But unfortunately, there's a bit of that's created a bit of a headache because that means there's more vacancies in the residential homes. Hence, the homes are looking to charge more to sort of compensate for the fact that they're not kind of fully occupied. Hence, they're not getting as much income. So we've got that sort of double hit. Although there's less people in residential homes, we're paying more for the ones that are in there. There is a significant level of review activity going on, and there has been review activity going on to try and reduce those packages as people kind of, I suppose, progress and need less support, make sure reablement is brought back in and used fully. But the benefit of that is likely only to really impact next year, as it takes a level of time, and we're almost halfway through the year now. I mentioned health income from last year, and there are discussions with health at the moment, and there is some optimism that we will get a significant amount of money from health. And there's also conversation about whether that will continue into future years. But the truth is, it's not going to solve all the problems. The overspend's just too big. So just to, I suppose, to make members aware, there's going to be a problem this year, and it's likely to put pressure on the sort of the budget in future years as well. Moving down in terms of other overspends, corporate resources stands out about £1 million over. That's all related to the commercial sort of services. School food volumes are still a bit down, as we kind of obviously started the year with still the remnants of lockdowns. Not all schools have sort of come back fully in terms of sort of offering sort of meal services, but also Bow Manor Hall is still closed to obviously another sort of big income stream there. So again, it was expected, but there's not a lot you can kind of do about it when your sort of services are restricted. Next overspend, capital financing isn't really an overspend. We got extra money from the business rate pilot, so all that is just allocating it to finance. And so you'll notice that the income budgets are showing favourable, and that's all that is there. General fund, 3.7 million over. That's the high needs deficit I mentioned earlier. We do need to put money aside for that because we need to cash flow. Obviously, we're paying schools for that service. So you have to find the money somewhere, even though the intention is to get it back through the high needs grant when that allows. That does leave us at a balance of the £12 million over. We did foresee that there was going to be problems this year, so we did create the COVID budget as part of the MTFS, so that can be accommodated in this budget. And it's not likely all the COVID budget is going to be used this year, but before we can allocate it to kind of, I suppose, other council priorities, we do need to get a bit better sight of what are the implications going to be next year, because obviously things like the adult social care issue isn't going to go away overnight, so we just need to be careful about when we do release things there. So that's all I was going to say on revenue, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I think it's on 33, where you referred to the impact of the target operation. Is that working correctly for us? Vacancies in increase.
I think it is an interesting one, because so that was a department strategy, and you're right, it links back to the target operating model around kind of the desire that it's better for people to be looked after in their own home, and actually it's better for us because it's cheaper, because people obviously are paying their own kind of accommodation costs rather than a residential home. You pick that up as well, but I think the issue is, instead of a gradual managed transition where the capacity of the market naturally adapts to it. COVID came along, and suddenly, like that, people don't want to go into care homes anymore. So I think it's one of those. It's the right thing to do, but sort of external circumstances hit it and created a problem within the transition. You would hope, if you look forward a few years' time, and the market kind of does adapt again to kind of the right level of capacity, it will become the right thing to do again. But yeah, just timing was very unfortunate.
Mr. Galton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on paragraph 27 and 28, it's a success in a way that we're managing now to create some internal capacity, but it seems it's being taken up. I've got the right paragraph. It's the one about providing in-house provision for to meet high needs. It might be 27, 28. Anyway, it's that one to do with the high needs block, but it's now suggesting that this is being filled with people that are coming through rather than taking children out of very, very high cost out of county. So it is being successful, but obviously the demand, and there's mention of looking at that, and presumably the outcome will be that we just need more provision if we're going to address this issue of children continually having to be educated out of their county if they need high needs. So I just wondered if Declan had got a comment on that, how we're going to address it. The second issue just like to raise is the constant one coming from the public on well, why is the council in such a bad position with COVID? You know, you've had all this money from the government. The perception that's coming across in the press and the media is councils have been given lots of money. What's the problem? Why are we still struggling? And I do think we need to define the narrative better on this. Of what exactly are the pressures, and that money is not being enough. Why we are having difficulties. The other comment that comes, well, of course, everyone's working from home now. You must be saving loads of money at County Hall. People having to provide their own heating, their own power, electricity, and so on. Council must be saving loads of money because nobody's in council offices anymore. So I just wonder what the response to that is. Have we quantified? I know we recognise we've made some savings, home working, and not providing things that we would normally provide. I just wondered if we quantified that and what the overall position is on that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go through those one at a time. Hopefully I remember them correctly. So I think the first one you were referring to was paragraph 22, where the SEND, it talks about the high needs. A similar activity is happening where you refer to paragraphs 26 and 27 in the social care setting, but that's much earlier days. The SEND, you're absolutely right. The desire was to build much more locally based provision so that you save on two things. One, the child having to sort of be transported to an independent setting, hence saving that cost, but also the huge cost of independent settings, which can be sort of £60,000 plus a year per annum. You know, you're getting into sort of the cost of Eton or other sort of private schools type thing. So that's the aim. But problem with, and it is beneficial, we've saved sort of a few £1 million over the last few years just because the cost of supporting that child has come down, but you've still got a new cost nonetheless because the demand is higher than it previously is. So that pool of children need support is much bigger. So that has been a bit of a focus, but it's an increasing focus of the department because it's one of these, you can't build your way out of the problem. We're deferring some of the cost increases, but at the end of the day, it's just going to, unless you can turn that tap off or at least restrict the flow to it's a much more normal kind of go in line with sort of the pupil population, it's always going to be a problem. And the government have put money in, but obviously it hasn't been enough. So you're right, it is going to be, we can't just continue to try and build our way out of this. There has going to be some sort of tapering the demand up front. Some of it will be on the kind of I suppose the preventative alternative kind of service, but some of it is just being better at saying no and trying to find a way that says no that doesn't end us up in a sort of a tribunal, which we tend to lose because the kind of the court or the judge often sort of sides with the parent. Obviously, kind of parental choices are very, very big influence. It's being better at being able to say no in a way that kind of doesn't end up just expensive sort of loss in the tribunal.
Just pick up then on this you're forecasting 26 million is going to increase to the cumulative high needs deficit. That's more than the total gap in funding for the whole council, isn't it? Casting. I mean, nobody wants to prevent children having the right outcomes and the need, but this is falling on the authority. What can we do about this? You say the government is putting money in, but it's clearly woefully inadequate. If we're forecasting a 26 million just on one single budget head, have we got a strategy? Perhaps I should be asking the lead member, what is the strategy to deal with this? Because I'm not clear, Chair, other than hoping that the government's going to come up with something, what we're doing on this.
I think if I can, I mean, our directors for education and for adult social care with lead members are looking at this. I mean, there's transformation programs in adults. There's obviously the Newton Europe work, which is looking to reduce costs. I mean, 27 talks about the Defining Children and Family Services for the Future programme, which has looked at work streams to reduce the requirement for residential placements. I mean, a lot of work's going on in both adults and children's, but I mean, the actual physical on the table at 18, it shows that the deficit this year, the overspend is 13.4 million, but obviously that there will be underspends as well in all the other departments that bring that down. But it is being looked at, and that is what we're working hard. But I mean, I think as Declan said, the demand has increased for both adult places, cost of people coming out of hospitals within the COVID funding was good. And it was there for a purpose, and we've tried to do that, but people didn't want to come in to stay in hospital for their rehabilitation. They were being sent home, and it's obviously the issues that you've had of then trying to get the care in the home, and it's a very high cost. So it's
Thank you, Jim. Not sure that addresses the specific issue of SEND and the high needs block, which is outside of the county council's revenue budget. But if there is a deficit on that, I'm right in saying, for you, Chair, that has to be met by our own resources. It's not met from the education block. Is that right? So that 20, unless we can do something to get that budget under control, or get the government to put more money into the funding dedicated schools grants, we're not going to be able to address this. We're just like the provider of last resort. We have to backfill the overspend. Is that right?
So that's correct. At the moment, we have to cash flow it. The money goes out, so it has to be found somewhere. But it is, they're still trying to make it that position, so it is a sort of a cash flowing of it. So we're not taking the debt away from the high needs block, but it's just a practical reality, as it were. The other thing I'd stress is the 26 is cumulative over several years. So when we compare to the MTFS gap, that 20+ million MTFS gap is the in-year deficit, where it's kind of, it is less than half that level in high needs. But you are right to call it out. It is a significant problem for the authority. And although the building side of the sort of the high needs development programme has been very successful in terms of creating additional capacity, it's that upfront demand reduction side that really needs to kind of improve. So you're right in what you're saying. It's a big issue, and it's not something on that kind of upfront side that we've fully got a grip with. We do go into it in truth in more detail in the MTFS reports, but it's maybe something if you want to. Is one of the key issues of the authority, that sort of the director of children, the sort of children's scrutiny. It's probably worth you sort of getting into the skin of it there, because they are doing quite a bit of work on it at the moment to try and, sort of, I suppose, turn the dial on it a bit more.
Mr. Hunt, did you have
just a quick point to round this off? This is very much look at this year's rather than a strategy. Come to look at that. Tackling this. Or having a strategy to do. I agree with.
Did you want to come in?
I think I'd just say, I mean, I think we work with all, I mean, the NHS are looking to fund, if people are coming out of hospital earlier and being rehabilitated at home, there is a cost. And I think, we are hoping, I mean, there was hope that £5 million additional funding would be obtained from the NHS to go towards the cost that we're picking up. And it's a cost. It's a cost, and I think we're looking at that. And I think as well, children and young people are looking at the costs being given. It has to be the fair cost. So it's.
Chair, I think there's some confusion about the issue we're raising. We're raising the high needs block of the schools block. schools funding. It's nothing to do with.
I was just crossing over the two because obviously the two to us are both an issue. You talked about the COVID funding. I think your initial statement was the COVID.
I'm sorry. Yes, that was a separate question I was raising regarding the COVID funding and why we're in such a.
In which case, I'd suggest what Declan said. I mean, children scrutiny and I think adult scrutiny, it would be a good place to look into the detail of that. So, perhaps the chairs could sort of look at that and take that on as in detail.
Mr. Pendleton.
Thank you. Just to, if I may, come in on that particular aspect of education, health and care plans and provision in our local schools. I do know that when Ivan was the lead member a couple of years ago now, and I was his support, we looked then at moving as much capacity into developing more special needs areas in our local schools. We built another one and opened it in Shepshire. And of course that has allowed us to bring in some of our out pupils, if you like, out county pupils. The problem has and is very well understood. It's not an easy one to get around. Equally, what we did do was also look at the criteria for education, health and care plans. And you will probably be aware that right now we're waiting for the last iteration or deliberation of the courts in terms of how we define our education, health and care plans. And that is also an issue because the travel costs at the side of that for out county, of course, and for in county too, are considerable for high needs pupils. So it's quite a difficult one. As Declan has said, I think health, I think education scrutiny is the place to dial in on that one, and they have got a handle on all those issues, and they will be able to help you with how, for a long time now, we have been working on trying to close the crocodile jaws, if you like, of need and our capacity. And it's not an easy one, but they are certainly well into it. And I wouldn't like us to today to feel that we'd said that Leicester County Council wasn't actually dealing with this, because it is. Thank you, Chairman.
Do any other members? Yes, Councillor Fry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would just like to endorse what Mr. Pendleton has just laid out, and you may be assured, councillors, that, and listening in, that the Children and Families Scrutiny Commission are very well aware of this. In fact, this was the main topic of the conversation yesterday at our meeting. But it is a bit of a balance, because we have to look after our children and young people, but we also have to try and balance the books. And it is very difficult when you are dealing with this, and we could end up with a lot of appeals. So it is, but just to be reassured that the Children and Families Scrutiny Overview Committee, with me as the chair, we are certainly very aware of this and are doing everything we can, working with the directors and the officers of that department.
Do any other members have any comments, questions on this part of the report? No, otherwise, thank you for all the comments, questions, and over to you for the next part of the report, Declan.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So just moving on to the capital section again, just go through the key changes rather than every change in the capital programme. So the first up is the Children's and Family Service. You'll notice an increase there, which links to some of the topics we talked about before about kind of trying to create more sort of local kind of based provision, not necessarily to provide all the operational sort of side of the care home sort of service ourselves, but to just sort of pay for the accommodations. Hence it becomes cheaper. Obviously our level of our cost of funding is very, very low compared to the private sector. So there is a £2 million increase in the sort of residential kind of placements for the Children's and Family Service. They are in the process of bidding for a grant, so hopefully that kind of half of that will get sort of funded by government, and we still do need a business case justification. But I would stress again, just like the high needs, but we've had just a discussion on just continue increasing provision is part of the answer, but it's not the whole answer. You still need to keep that focus on upfront, whether it's preventative or just kind of making sure that kind of the eligibility sort of is where it needs to be, putting children in the right sort of setting to give them the best sort of outcome. So it is part of that sort of solution of just making the cost of provision cheaper. And so that's a key one in the children's service. You also noticed there was a cabinet report earlier in the year that did talk about looking at buying an SEND property. That didn't go ahead, so we have taken that sort of funding back out. The outlook is a bit better in terms of the high needs funding. We have been sort of historically funding most of the sort of the high needs block development, but we're seeing more government grants coming through and Section 106 funding now. So previously it was minimal, but that is a side that is looking more optimistic for the future, because obviously kind of if you're having to put capital money in, that's still taking away sort of county council resources as well. But we're looking to try and move that much more to kind of external funding sides. And the big one in the sort of the report members obviously have picked up on is that the E&T side of things, where the increase is £35 million on cost, but that's less £4 million on sort of asset management grant that they're expected to come through. But that's the key bit in there is kind of 2 Melton schemes that have overspent, and the report does outline some of the details on that. I mean, members obviously be aware of what's happening sort of nationally around kind of construction, and also kind of obviously we have trailed that these are sort of big complex schemes, you know, far bigger than what we normally sort of undertake as authority, and there were always risks around them. As a scheme develops, you find more. So in terms of the funding of that, it is a bit of a mixed bag. We do expect to get more developer funding in. There's more sort of housing coming in that area. It should be that sort of 7 million of the £35 million overspend. They also secured some money from the LEP for £4 million. So if that 35 million overspend, 11 will come from external sources, but that does leave us with a £24 million sort of cash problem to solve. At the moment, we've earmarked that against kind of debt. We may review that as we get through the MTFS, but just to highlight to members, if that does end up as debt at £24 million, it's about £1 million a year. It adds to the financial kind of difficulties that you're in. So, you know, there's no free lunch. You've still got to find the money. You're just finding it over obviously a longer period of time. Did want as well to draw members' attention to, I suppose, presentation, the way we're changing things a bit. And it's kind of, at the moment, it tends to be standalone schemes, but we've had a few sort of review and support from sort of independent consultants on this about how we sort of just get our arms a bit better around the capital. One advice there is to kind of create this notion of portfolio risk. So instead of just trying to look at each scheme individually and ending up with a dilemma about how much risk loading you put on there, if you create a portfolio risk, you know that schemes across the board, some are going to be up, some are going to be down, but it just creates a pool. So hopefully your overall contingency is lower, but you've got a contingency nonetheless. So the proposal is to have a different line that presents about £10.6 million of portfolio risk. It's just an estimate of the exceptional items that could hit that you can't avoid. You know, exceptional inflation that could get even higher than it is at the moment. And as I've touched on, it does work best if you've got several schemes that can all feed off that same portfolio. So you've got the ups and downs kind of sort of offsetting each other. At the moment, we've sort of kept it away from that sort of main transport sort of scheme lines, just so we can sort of keep a bit sort of more transparency and control over that allocation. And it doesn't remove, obviously, the need to sort of manage scoping contractors. And it's not a silver bullet either. That's not a definite kind of worst case scenario. Costs could still go up if you know, obviously, when you get into sort of actually digging on the ground, you find out more kind of exceptional things. So that is obviously the big area in there that sort of did want to bring out in the capital programme. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Declan. Does any members have questions, comments on this part of the report? Mr. Richardson.
Just on the capital programme, Declan, I just wonder if perhaps we need to think about a change at how we look at some of these things. So, you know, when we're investing in highways, for instance, do we take into account of which ones we invest in, which would then facilitate the speedier delivery of homes? Because for every 1,000 new homes in the county, that brings us in £1.5 million a year of revenue income. So if we target what we have available in the capital funding for opening up and facilitating those housing developments, working with LRPs at a speedier level, we do get that massive impact on our potential revenue budget, as opposed to some of the other schemes where we're funding roads which actually bring nothing in, or where we've put them in significantly earlier, perhaps as we have at, you know, Lucep in Loughborough, where there's going to be no building for a long while, whereas, you know, you could use that money to facilitate roads, bringing house building quicker elsewhere. So I just wonder, are we working cross portfolios and departments to actually have the best revenue hit for the capital expenditure. And just as a side question on the corporate asset investment fund, we show net income. Should that in fact be gross income? Because it doesn't take into account in that chart any of the overheads or costs of running the service. So it can't, to me, be net income. It can only be gross income.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. And we'll take those in reverse order just because it's easier. The CAFE one, it does include most of the sort of the overhead. It doesn't include things like an allocation of the county hall building where the people sort of sit, but it does include an allocation of the team who run CAFE. It's just spread across the different lines. So it's just hidden, well, not hidden, but it's just not sort of immediately obvious. But we do try and include that that rounded view of sort of CAFE. And I suppose the reason we put, the net is I suppose the bigger costs are things like the maintenance, business rates on voids, things like that. So hence it nets off the main sort of just the pure rental income. But it is pretty much the net position. It's only going to be the broader allocation of overheads, like I say, like county hall or the chief exec that aren't in there. In terms of the first one, I mean it's a tricky one. It's a devil of a one to answer because kind of in some ways we kind of in some ways you do, because it's kind of we have a bit of an aversion to sort of too much forward funding, because obviously that loads the risk on us, which kind of plays to what you're saying. If it enables areas where it's quicker house building, it's obviously a positive because you're not having that sort of that exposure to the forward funding. But it's I think probably the honest answer is that's a level of sophistication beyond where we sort of operate at the moment, and it's difficult obviously because obviously the district council sort of almost instigate with sort of the local plans. You've got the dependency on the developer, but certainly with when things like the housing infrastructure fund grants are available, that is what they tend to target. So if they are available, we'll try and bid into them, which kind of enables the sort of the virtuous circle you've kind of touched on. But I suppose it's difficult if those sort of grants aren't in there to sort of do it, because you do worry about the exposure. The other piece that does make this really difficult is kind of it depends on the residents that are in those houses, because obviously as an authority, we're not just purely funded by council taxes or the government grants. And not if you get a professional couple in a house with sort of no kids and the middle aged, you're absolutely right, we'd probably make a profit out of the council tax. But if you get a sort of an elderly couple in there needing kind of support with sort of minimal of their own resources, it's probably kind of, it costs us more than the council tax we earn. So it'd be quite a sort of a challenge, I suppose, sort of to manage not just kind of the timing of the houses, but the residents in the houses to make sure it was a positive cash flow position. But there probably is something in what you say though about kind of just being smarter about kind of where you target your resources for the things that are going to come forward the quickest, and think about that sort of wider impact on the council as well, as opposed to just sort of scheme by scheme, as it were. So there's probably something in it, but it'd be a devil to do sort of fully, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. Now, I was only just thinking that with the level of house building that's anticipated to be required and done by councils across the country, or facilitated by councils, not done by councils, over the coming years, with the government looking at 330,000 units a year, it would just strike me as the right time to actually invest that time and effort to see if it's worthwhile. So we know from our population the average income we get from a house net across the country. So I accept what you say about depending on the nature of the people in there, but we can only work on averages. But again, if we put the infrastructure in earlier, you get the 106 earlier because the building's done earlier. So you start to develop a virtual circle of your 106 coming in considerably earlier than it currently is, because we facilitated those plots being developed earlier than they might otherwise done because the infrastructure's in place. Whereas if we do it bit by bit with infrastructure, so it might be a case of borrowing money might be a viable reason to do it, where we have reasonable certainty of the speed of building of a site, particularly a major one that could bring in substantial income for us, because once you get it year one for revenue, you've got it every year for revenue, and it goes up each year.
Okay, probably overcomplicated. I take your point on that, and that is something that I suppose why the Melton scheme was done in the way it's been done is, and you're absolutely right, rather than having 4 different developers which may then trigger a tiny primary school on each of the 4 sites. You look at it as a holistic kind of master plan, as it were, and then you might end up with a 3-form entry primary school that covers the whole of that sort of 4 sort of different developer sites. So no, it does get looked at in increasingly kind of. So in terms of that, does it make sense in that area the way we're doing it? And you're absolutely right. Rather than you have to put that risk on the forward funding to enable the infrastructure just to partly to get a bit of control over the scheme, but also just to enable it to sort of happen in that sort of, more a 10-year vision as opposed to I've had one request, I'm going to do it now. So no, you're absolutely right. That's been trying to do more. Obviously, kind of Melton's the first example. It's what we tried to do a bit in Lutterworth as well, but other opportunities will kind of come forward as well.
Mr. Golden.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Could we just have an update then where we are on the Melton scheme in terms of decision making, noting that the cost is increasing by 35 million in excess of the projected 98 million. Has the authority committed to this scheme? Because in June, Cabinet agreed that there were still issues that it couldn't commit to because of HCA rules. That led to quite a backlash, didn't it, from Melton? Very unusual situation. Council producing a petition against this authority's decision. So it's obviously in the capital programme, but have we formally made a decision to commit to both sections, both parts of the Melton scheme? And if so, what is the arrangement with Melton then in terms of sharing the risk?
In terms of the formality of the decision, so the updated capital programme obviously go to Cabinet in sort of September, so that will kind of, I suppose, bring the level of sort of resources up in the capital programme to the level needed for the scheme. And it is likely that over kind of the period of these schemes and maybe other decision points, as either things change or kind of maybe other sort of grants or other conditions need accepting. But at the moment, is that the trigger in September is, I suppose, the next step for things to go ahead. So obviously things like the compulsory purchase order consultations going on like this. So that's not going to be the sort of final definitive choice made, but that's the next step on the road. So as far as the MTFS is concerned, it is a continuing scheme. In terms of the risk share with Melton, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to come back to you on that one. I know discussions have been ongoing and I've been sort of changing position, but actually where it ended up, I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to check and come back with you on that if that's okay.
So, Chair, is there a further report required to give the go-ahead commitment to this scheme and the terms of the grant from the HCA, or is that all now in place?
I'd have to check because there's more than one grant, to be honest. I don't want to give a misleading answer because I can't remember what sort of steps and changes are on those different grants. So I could come back to you with a response.
Checking through, could our legal officer help with us just in terms of decision making, where we are on this?
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. Yes, on the decision making, I understand there will be a report going to Cabinet on this. And with regard to the risk sharing agreement with Melton, legal discussions are ongoing with them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt.
Just as far as the wider situation is concerned, this whether a risk assessment does seem to me quite an important venture. It's something that could be described and discussed in more detail at the relevant scrutiny committee. This is a report, 34 paragraphs here, fundamental situation that is with Melton.
Okay, Mr. Becker.
I think, going forward, with all the new local plans emerging at the moment, there's over £600 million worth of infrastructure required. That's a huge ask. A large part of that will come from developer contributions. But I think really going forward, that's part of the the fairer funding we've sought is there is a gap, and I mean you're quite right in the Melton Mowbray with increasing costs at the moment, somewhere between 10 and 15% on a lot of the major schemes that we have that we've designed and we've laid out. Those costs are increasing, so it is just a matter of that. And certainly, I think the latest on the Melton is discussions are ongoing as to where we are. But as Declan says, reports will come back. But I think, for this county to succeed and be prosperous, I think we need to put that infrastructure in place. And I mean, Charnwood is a huge local plan. But we have to do that, and the infrastructure has to be covered. So that's why we're asking government, and that's why we have a call on various aspects of that. So, but work is underway, Simon. So,
Mr. Galton and Mr. Hunt, I think you're like.
So, Chair, on the wider picture, this committee was informed some time ago that, I think part of the MTFS, that what this authority wanted to achieve was a risk-sharing agreement with all the district councils, possibly bar over in Leicester, because they're not likely to have huge infrastructure rising from housing numbers, and that had prompted somewhat, choose my words carefully, exasperated reaction from the districts who saw this as, well, it's a county problem. Structure, schools, highways is county. The contrary argument is, well, we haven't got the money. Reasons you've just indicated. It's such a huge bill. Now that was advice. That was what we were told round about. But those discussions are ongoing. Districts, I believe, have obtained some legal advice whether this is even legally possible for the county to require these agreements. So I think Mr. Hunt's right. We do need, Chair, to have a report on the wider financial impact of that sum of money, how it's going to be funded, where we are with reaching district agreements. I mean, is it going to be done on a one-by-one basis, or are we looking to have an agreement with all, the majority of them? I think that there are some quite detailed questions there that do need looking at.
Mr. Bracken.
I think just coming back, when your last document on today's commission is strategic planning and growth related matters. I think the I think that document covers the size of what we're looking at and how we're looking to address it. So I think it is a case of the county and the districts and the boroughs working together, and that is what we're doing. So, and that has to continue for us to be successful.
Do we have any other comments, questions on this part of the report? No? Okay, thank you to members for the comments and questions, and over to Declan again.
This is just the MTFS sort of section is very, very short. So just highlighting the key points. Obviously, just a reminder, our current gap is 23 million, which is the difference between income expenditure in the final year of the MTFS units. That's our kind of a, if we didn't get there, that's our kind of a, or if we did get there, that was our challenge to sort of make savings, as it were. Obviously, as we roll forward the MTFS, the level of council tax doesn't tend to be sufficient that we sort of increase. We assume we get to sort of meet all the sort of service demand. So it really is that kind of interaction between sort of service growth and council tax that the key determines how much that £23 million gap would grow. But it tends to be in the region of £10 to £20 million before we start to sort of any add on either new savings or new income that we do get in there. We have, in terms of those savings, we have updated the savings and development appendix that went with the MTFS. So that is appended for kind of sort of members benefits as you were, so you're kind of aware of what is being progressing sort of semi behind the scenes before it's ready to be included in the MTFS. The timetable in the paper is included. We obviously found out yesterday sort of the comprehensive spending review in the budget is going to be towards the end of October, so that'll be kind of quite a big feed of information. And obviously, it's much more information, hopefully, than we were expecting before with the announcements yesterday on adult social care. I suppose we're a million miles away in terms of the level of detail needed to truly understand the impact on the authority and those impacts yesterday. But hopefully they'll drip out as sort of the between now and the kind of the spending review, and we should start to get broad indications of funding coming towards local government on a sort of an ongoing basis. But we'll have to wait and see. It looks a significant change, but whether the change in the funding is sort of in equilibrium or not is going to take a while before we fully understand that.
Any comments, questions from members? No. Okay. Well, thank you to everyone for their comments, questions today. Mr. Bracken, did you have any comments you wanted to make in addition?
I think I'd just say, I mean, the spending review was announced yesterday, just for members, if you haven't seen it, the Chancellor has said he'll look at ensuring strong and innovative public services, and he'll look at the levelling up process across the UK, working with local leaders, leading the transition to net zero, advancing global Britain and delivering our plan for growth. So they're the areas that the spending review should cover. But as Declan says, the timing is that should be with us for a 3-year period at the budget in October. So we await that, but no real details or meat on that. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Declan and Mr. Brecken and all the members for their questions and comments. So item 9 is the Corporate Investment Fund Annual Report for 2020-2021, which is on pages 17 to 46 in the main agenda pack. John Bennett, the Head of Strategic Property Services, is joining us online to present this report, and Declan and the lead member, Mr. Brecken, will also remaining for this item as well. So if I hand over to you, John, please.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Rather than take the Commission through the cover report and the annual report line by line, like Declan, I thought it was best that we go through and provide an overview and highlight some of the elements of the report that are worthy of note. Once again, the news is positive. The fund has increased in value and generated more income than last year. This is the sixth year in a row that the fund has generated both capital and revenue growth. The annual report, to be found in appendix pages 23 to 46 of your pack, details how the fund's performance compares with last year. The report is first and hopefully only one to cover the full year of COVID epidemic and the lockdown that the country was subject to. And just like last year, the fund has weathered the storm very well, with more lettings and no tenants leaving the fund's properties as a result of the pandemic. This is once more testament to the tight management of the fund. In terms of the performance of the fund, as I mentioned, the 2021 financial year has been a positive one. The fund's capital value now stands at 187.4 million, which represents a £16.5 million increase on last year, nearly a 10% uplift in value. This 187.4 million is comprised of direct property investments of 110.4, development property of 36 million, and £41 million worth of assets held in the pooled property and private debt sectors. As regards income growth, whilst the actual amount of 4.6 million is just slightly ahead of last year, it would have been 5.2 million net, but an accounting charge of £600,000 has been applied. This charge justifiably is a provision against bad debts and a sinking fund towards future property management issues. The let property investments produced a return of 9.3%, and overall the portfolio as a whole produced a return of 6.1%. Of note is the rural estate, which has exceeded the market for 14 consecutive years. In the last year, the rural sector increased in value by 25%, where the market growth was flat, and the fund's rural estate generated twice the income that the market did. The office market was unsurprisingly heavily impacted by COVID, and the sector has nationally suffered nearly a 5% drop in value. The fund's offices, however, managed a 1% increase. Income-wise, the fund did outperform the national market, and this is due to did perform in line with the national market, but this was would have been increased had there been more rent reviews and lease renewals last year. Also, the fund's major office development completed in November 2020, and whilst that improved the capital value of the sector, the tenant has the benefit of a rent-free period, and so the income benefit will not be reported until next year. Other schemes are still in the planning stage, and whilst we would have hoped to progress a couple more than we have, they're still being worked on. For example, the scheme at Pool Farm in Quon, further archaeological impact assessments and trial trenches have been now completed, and the revised application is soon to be submitted for a solar farm. This scheme differs from that previously reported scheme in that the zero carbon small workshop units have been removed from the scheme for now. At Leaders Farm in Lutterworth, we're still in the pre-planning stage. The scheme has identified operators and deals agreed, but we're still in discussions with planners as the scheme does represent a minor departure from what the local plan envisaged for the site. We have tried to find local plan allocated uses for 5 years and so far have had no luck and therefore are taking a more operator-led approach. Other schemes coming online include the new phase of Airfield Farm Business Park at Market Harborough. Cabinet approved this next phase and the planning application was submitted last month. The Commission will see on pages 34 to 36 of the appendix a summary of notable achievements of the fund over the last year. All of the units that were completed at the just mentioned Airfield Business Park, they were all let and the revenue generated in line with expectations. Apollo Business Park at Colville was also fully let in the last financial year. This development is notable as it was previously let as open storage land, generating just under £26,000 a year. And now redeveloped with help from the growth deal funding via the LEP. It is fully let 41,000 square foot scheme, generating £322,000 a year instead. The office development at Lucep at Loughborough University and Science Enterprise Park completed this year and the tenant, the Access Group, took occupation. When the annual report is brought before you next year, the full rent of £1.6 million a year will be included. The actual building itself is most impressive and won a global award for how the project was run. This was against stiff competition and beating 2 schemes from the Far East, which were shortlisted for the award. Other major schemes still in the pipeline are those at Lutterworth East and Junction 2 of the M69, still in the various stages of the development process. Lutterworth East is close to securing planning permission, whilst at Junction 2 M69, we're still in the high-level feasibility stage with public consultation underway. Just like I reported last year, the possibility of a recession remains, which may have a deep, long-lasting impact on the fund. This may take the form of a restriction on the availability of capital for future developments, leading to lower than projected incomes, bad debts from tenants, or tenants who do not renew their leases, or properties that are difficult to let. Over the winter of 2020, an independent review was undertaken by consultants to analyse if the fund's investment strategy was still optimal. The Commission will see a summary of the results of that review on pages 45 and 46 of the appendix. In short, the recommendations are to increase our logistics, storage and distribution assets, maintain our office assets and rural investments, and give consideration to investments in renewable energy and infrastructure. The recommendation to invest in residential is satisfied to our mind by the schemes at Lutterworth East, etc., rather than buying up blocks of buy-to-let flats. The council as a whole has also been investing in residential as part of its Adults and Community Social Care Investment Programme, and it is not envisaged that further residential investments are required at this stage. To conclude, the 2021 year has been robust given a volatile property market and is set for another good year of sustainable growth. Final note before I finish, I heard that Councillor mentioned the query regarding the gross income. I can say that the gross income across the portfolio, including property, pooled investments and private debt, was 7.46 million. The annual report will be presented to Cabinet on the 17th September. Thank you, Chair. Happy to receive any questions.
Thank you, John. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you very much, Chair. John, thank you very much for that. Obviously very interesting to actually read the report itself and also to listen to some of the comments in your summary. Can I ask you start a conversation about particularly the chart shown on page 6 of the report? I think it's page 28 of our report, which shows the split by market sector of income return and capital growth return. You mentioned in particular, I think, about the rural income return as being exceptionally high. I think actually it's the capital growth that's probably exceptionally high. The income return is only shown as 2.3%, which I'm assuming is from sort of income from where we've got farmland and it's the sort of the farmers, etc. Capital growth, I'm assuming, is because actually we've now got planning permission for a substantial amount of the farmland, or is it just capital growth in farmland in total? Which one of those two is it?
If it had been a result of planning permission, that would then be counted as development land. So this is an increase in value of the land itself for its own use.
So okay, so this is purely about farming land. So where because the development line on this chart is pretty small. So where have we had no uplift at all from moving farmland to development? There's obviously quite a few references to farms receiving planning permission.
Yes, in the past year, there haven't been any new substantial developments on farmland that would have been accounted for this year.
Okay, so the reference to sort of the planning gain through some of those farms in the document is not reflected at the moment within anything financially that's moved this year.
That's correct. Yes, all the development land has already been moved across.
Okay, can I ask in that case a quick question about the strategy relating to farmland? Have we historically, again, interesting reading the document, have we sort of inherited the farmland as part of the county council's sort of history, or have we gone out to purchase farmland specifically with the mind that this may actually be sort of future development land, or land that's potentially for future development in the future?
And the most of the land was actually acquired in the 1920s, so I certainly cannot take any credit for the rural estate that the council has. What we operate now is almost a one in, one out, where, you know, if we were to sell tranches of land for residential or other commercial uses, we do look to replace that acreage. And also, where farmland comes up for sale that is adjacent to current tenanted farmland, we look to buy that and then include it in the adjacent farmer tenants' land as well.
And in acreage terms, how much do we actually own at the moment across the county?
Approximately 7,700 acres.
Okay, so it's quite a substantial farm in that case, or farming stock. I mean, that's quite large. And I'm assuming that's all tenanted. So we have a whole series of tenant farms that look after it, or do we actually use a single entity to manage that for us?
No. It is each one is tenanted. In the last year, we've let one farm. We've let 3 other parcels. We've got 2 more lettings. Some farmers retire. Some look to sell their business. Others just decide to leave the business for one reason or another, and we look to re-let it.
Thank you very much. Changing slightly to the office market, obviously a huge sort of shock to the office market over the last 18 months. Still, I suspect probably still to be resolved as far as what they're actually going to mean for companies and their properties, and obviously in the private and public sector there's a huge number of organisations that are currently reviewing what their office needs are and where they're going to be located. Within our office stock that we hold within the portfolio, what's our average break period on leases?
We tend to work on a basis of a 10-year lease with a 5-year break. We do have some 15-year leases with 10-year breaks, where we, having to put in investment ourselves in the last 2 years have exercised any of the breaks, and we have done office lettings during that time.
Okay, and obviously from this point onwards, I mean, we're going to be looking at those breaks probably with a great deal of anticipation to actually see what our tenants are looking to do, whether any of them are actually downsizing or looking to potentially relocate completely. So for instance, the building that's been put up at Lucep, I think you mentioned there's a rent-free period associated with that as well. So what is the break on that one?
That's a 15-year lease with a break at 10, and the rent-free period is now expired, but it wouldn't have been recorded in last year's annual report.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions, comments from members? Mr. Richardson.
Just a quick question, John, if I may, because I honestly don't know the answer and you're the expert, so I thought while you're here. In the report you mentioned the M69 junction to Stony Stanton, which I know obviously you put forward in the call for sites to Blaby District Council. Now, as you're aware, there are plans submitted for a strategic rail freight interchange nearby. Now, the legislation covering strategic infrastructure sites does actually codify that you can't build large housing developments within a certain distance of a strategic infrastructure site. So were that site to be given permission, what would be the knock-on impact of the potential size of this development? Because as I understand the legislation, it couldn't be anywhere near 5,000 houses because of the distance from an infrastructure site.
I'm not aware that the residential scheme at the Stony Stanton and Sapgate area is going to be materially impacted. In fact, that the rail freight interchange discussions that they've been having with the National Infrastructure Commission envisaged housing going up on the other side of the M69, and indeed there was talk that Tritex may have been interested in trying to bring something forward in the past themselves. So I'm happy to have another look at it, but in terms of all of our work so far with the planning consultants and discussions with Blaby, and indeed with Tritex Big Box, the people who are bringing forward the rail freight interchange proposals, nobody has mentioned that there needs to be a further offset other than that envisaged by the fact that it's the other side of the M69.
Oh, thanks for that, John. I just wanted clarification because I was reading the legislation the other day, and it clearly does state that you can't have large housing development sites near strategic rail freight, near strategic infrastructure sites, which seems somewhat perverse because obviously of what you've just said. So the legislation seems contrary to what is being discussed.
Yeah,
but that doesn't surprise me.
Okay.
Okay, and any other members? Mr. Hunt.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very clear report, and verbally as well as in front of us. I just wanted to pick up this thing about the rural portfolio, which Jonathan's referred to. How do you? I'm looking, by the way, at the page, your page 6, our page 28, second bullet from the bottom. The returns, the rural portfolio remain exceptionally strong. The returns remain exceptionally strong. But largely through capital growth. Now, how exactly do you estimate current capital value? Is it by book value? Is it by rents that you're getting, or how is it actually evaluated?
Well, we have within the department a team of valuers. So each year that the annual report starts to be pulled together, from April until submission time, we undertake a full asset valuation review of each of the assets within the portfolio. So we have a look at obviously national comparables, other benchmarks, and provide a value.
So it's your own valuation, and it's largely farmland.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Okay. And perhaps a more naive or political response to this, perhaps, I don't know, but in view of the report we've just had on the MTFS and the extra capital that we're putting into the fund this next year, people would naturally say, well, why are we investing this money in projects, however beneficial they are in the long term, when we've got short-term issues? Is that something for me to respond to? I wouldn't want to put it on.
I'm happy to sort of take that on board. I mean, certainly I'm new to this portfolio and cabinet position, but when I first came on board, it was a question that I've asked, and I've been quite open in my conversations with sort of Chris, Declan and John regarding, if we had to, other assets, and obviously that's what we look at. I mean, there are assets in the portfolio that John's said there that we are looking to sell on, and that is part of it. But it's, I think it is, the performance, the overall benefit of the overall fund. There were targets set when it was set up, and we are still moving towards that. But it is being looked at. It was a question I asked, quite an open question, because if we've got an asset that has a value and we can realise that asset and put that funding towards other things, then that's something that we would look at. So and that's a conversation that I've certainly had. So whether John or Declan want to add anything to that.
Just to add that, I mean, it is part of our strategy that we can invest some of our kind of our one-off resources, that were, and turn them into an ongoing revenue benefit. It obviously helps with that sustainability of the MTFS, and kind of it's a balancing. I mean, it's a small balancing thing, but it does help. It's not just about council tax, not just about government grant, but we've got another funding stream in our control. But it as long as I suppose that trade-off as not having the one-off resources to spend on the today's immediate priorities is worth investing, so that you do get that sort of ongoing revenue benefits. You can prop up service in the long term. It feels the right thing to do, and it's obviously right for Scrutiny and sort of the lead member to keep challenges about, is that kind of trade-off right? And at the moment, coming through COVID, there was obviously kind of some nervous times, but I mean the performance of the fund was exceptional, exceptionally strong. It shows it's kind of a well run and sort of reasonable sort of level of diversification as well. So at the moment, it is ticking the boxes.
Mr. Barclay.
Thank you. I did just really to say I think what Declan has said is true. The benefit of getting the returns to prop up the general fund are probably more beneficial than selling off assets to use in the short term to fund a deficit. The ongoing benefit is greater. I mean, the fund is performing very well overall, particularly during the pandemic. Looking through the report, it is really exceptionally well run, and we're getting a 6.1% overall return. So it's not a question, it's a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Barclay. And any other members have questions, comments? No? Okay, well, thank you, John, for a detailed presentation and taking members' questions. Did you have any other comments you wanted to add to the item?
No, Chair, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Declan, Mr. Brecken, do you have anything you want to add? No? Okay, thank you very much to everyone for that item. So we move on to item 10, which is the East Midlands Shared Services Annual Performance Update. This is at pages 47 to 54 of your agenda pack. Declan and Mr. Brecken are remaining for this item as well, and we're also joined online by Lucy Littlefair, who's head of the East Midlands Shared Services. Lucy, can I check you can hear us okay?
I can, Chair, yes, thank you.
Yep, and please go ahead, Lucy.
Thanks very much. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to present this report, which details the performance of EMSS during the 2020-21 financial year, and I make a kind of an annual appearance at the Commission to kind of take you through the East Midlands Shared Services performance. So just to give you really an overview of the report, it details the background to the service and the partnership between Leicestershire County Council and Nottingham City Council. And you'll have seen and understood from the report that the main strategic priority for us during last year was the delivery of the Fit for the Future programme, which was the replacement of both councils' HR and finance systems. The report describes the programmes interrupted by the pandemic in March 20, but following a short pause, we managed to get ourselves back on track and commence then the phased rollout of the various different modules of the system, with the first go live happening in October 20. Importantly for LCC, we've now implemented both the finance module, which went live in November 20, and the HR and payroll system in April 21. For us, the focus this year is on stabilising that new system and all the associated processes for both the staff within EMSS and the managers and staff outside within the council. Because it always takes just a little bit of time for users to get used and acquainted with any changes in those kinds of processes, and I guess truly embed them into their ways of working and within the organisation. The report also refers to the implementation of a new customer query management system, which is already driving changes to the way that customers interact with us and delivering efficiencies. Operational performance remained consistent despite the competing demands of implementing the new system and the erratic transactional volumes, which kind of COVID threw at us in terms of invoices, amount of recruitment activity, all of those types of things. And then you'll see finally the note, the fact that we're consulting with the EMSS Joint Committee later this month on our revised strategic plan, which suggests utilising this year really to stabilise the service and the wider kind of user interfaces, and then identifying opportunities for efficiencies in future years. So it's really if you've got any questions on the report.
Thank you, Lucy. Do members have any questions, comments on the report? Mr. Richardson.
So, a quick one, if I may, Chairman. It's page 48, paragraph 10, where we're talking about the external audit that was carried out and the issues that were raised. I'm just slightly concerned about issue 1, where it mentions that the SIS admin team could assign themselves additional access. And the process put in to regulate this was they had to request approval for any access before they did it, but it doesn't say how that's going to be monitored or stopped, and it also doesn't confirm that the new system will actually stop that happening, because if I understand it correctly, they can just give themselves any additional access they want and nobody checks it or can see. So that doesn't really strike me as an appropriate resolution, if I may say.
Yeah, okay. So that was the case within the old system, Oracle e-business, where it was a very small team where, yes, they got themselves into a situation where if they needed, some different roles to be able to do some functionality within that live system, they would just be able to do that. What we've done is made sure that within the Oracle Cloud system that they simply aren't able to do that. The functionality isn't available to them, and there's an approvable, auditable kind of mechanism for any approvals for new roles that would go through to their line management. So we're satisfied that we have in the new system got the appropriate controls in place.
Just on a separate question, if I may, as well, you talk about obviously, I know it's essential of providing obviously staff the ability to work at home with equipment, etc. Do we know what the cost of that equipment was for 120 staff? Because it obviously a large number of staff and potentially a large amount of equipment.
We do, yes. To provide the laptops was a cost across the two councils of £75,000.
Any more questions, comments from members? No. Okay. Thank you, Lucy. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to the item? No.
Nothing I need to add. Thank you.
No. Okay. Thank you. And nothing, Declan, Mr. Brecken? No. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So we move on to item 11, which is the Leicester and Leicestershire Enterprise Partnership Annual Update. The Chief Executive of the LEP, Mr. Mandip Rai, and the Chair of the LEP Board, Mr. Kevin Harris, are here to present this item. Welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us today. I understand you'll be providing a presentation for this item, and members will find a copy of the presentation slides on pages 55 to 78 of your agenda packs. We're also joined by the lead member, Mr. Bedford, who is the County Council's representative on the LEP board, and Tom Purnell, the Assistant Chief Executive. Mr. Bedford, I understand you're introducing the item.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for inviting us to present today. So in June, I took over from the leader in terms of our representation on the LEP board from Leicestershire County Council. And since that time, I guess predominantly the work has been around progressing and developing the strategy that the Scrutiny Commission developed last time round. So essentially, I'm joined today by as the Chair just said, Mandip and Kevin, who will essentially be presenting the report. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read those slides about some of the really good news stories that are in there. So I'll hand over to them, and if you've got any questions, I will welcome them as you go along. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so are we ready to start the slides? Yeah, thank you.
That's better. Thank you for inviting Kevin and I to the Scrutiny Commission. It's always good to be back at County Hall, particularly in the glorious weather. You've received the slide deck. There are quite a few slides, and Peter, Kevin and I agreed that I'll run through them and pick out the salient points, assuming all members have read through the slides. There's a lot of detail in there, so it will allow plenty of time for questions for both Kevin, myself, and some of the other board directors. Obviously, we've got Terry Richardson and Jonathan Moore, also directors of the LEP. So if I start, just in terms of the presentation, what I plan to do is just go through very briefly the progress that the LEP has made. Needless to say, it's been an extremely challenging 18 months for our communities, our businesses, our economy and our organisations, and I'll come on to the LEP review, which no doubt members are aware is currently underway. So in terms of the progress, in 2020 and 2021, as part of the legacy to the local growth fund allocation, we were allocated an additional £20 million of Getting Building Fund. That was an extension effectively for the local growth fund. We went through a process and 4 projects were identified for allocation of GBF. St Margaret's Gateway, flagship project, regeneration of the bus station in the city centre, the sport park at Loughborough, very much to extend the current accommodation, really to accommodate the UK Anti-Doping Agency and to bring jobs from Whitehall up to Leicester and Leicestershire. Now, the Cabinet Office have been taking a strategic approach in terms of levelling up and arm's length bodies, and Loughborough was identified certainly as an area where there was potential to develop a sports cluster. So the strategic decision was taken by the board to allocate £6 million to the sports park. Junction 21 of the M1 and the A512 improvements, an allocation of £1.8 million, was effectively an extension of the LGF project. Those that are familiar with the area, there have been quite significant roadworks there, much improved now, and that project is due for completion by the end of March next year. And the final project that was allocated GBF funding was the Granby Street and George Street Regeneration Gateway, and that was very much to improve the sustainable transport and modes of transport in that part of the city. Moving on to the next slide. In terms of the European structural funds, those funds were a programme from 2014 to 2021. Quite significant investment in business support, innovation, employment support and skills. Now that programme came to an end in March 21, but the projects will continue. It's an N+3 that the European Union impose, and those projects will continue to the end of December 2022. As you can see from the slide, a range of outputs in terms of the numbers of businesses supported, the numbers of people that have been reskilled and trained, and a number of capital projects that have been invested to support the transition to net carbon zero. In terms of the skills report, we published our skills report in March 2021, and that really was a snapshot of how the local workforce was performing, where the skill shortages and the key sectors that have been certainly impacted by the COVID pandemic and those that will be mostly affected by the EU transition. So that is a useful resource that has been used by local schools, colleges to really shape the curriculum to ensure that we've got the future skills that the businesses require. The next slide is really the legacy from the local growth fund. So that programme was from 2014 to 2021. In total, we secured £126 million for 20 capital projects across the city and county, and 6 projects were delivered in our final year. I won't go through them all in detail, but it was the Leicester North West and Major Transport Scheme, the commercial workspace programme at Pioneer Park, 2 projects that supported the space sector, and that's the Space Centre itself and the refurbishment, the Space Park Leicester, which is a flagship project for Leicester and Leicestershire, and again the M1 junction 23 improvements. There was a total allocation of LGF of £12 million, and this is the final year allocation for that particular project. Now, those are outputs we will need to continue to report to government on an annual basis, and we are awaiting further guidance in terms of how long we'll be reporting those outputs. In terms of capital projects, as you're aware, the infrastructure works, the actual outputs in terms of the number of homes and jobs created will be created in the long term, so we will continue to monitor those. In terms of the Growing Places Fund, this is a £12 million revolving loan fund, which we've used to support over 11 projects now. The board decided in response to the COVID economic recovery plan that it would repurpose just under £1.7 million of Growing Places Fund to support COVID recovery. On the right-hand side, you'll see the investments that were agreed, a range of employment and skills initiatives, and also business support, particularly around digital skills, NEET prevention, because the impacts of the pandemic has certainly affected that particular cohort, and that is in response to supporting people not in education, employment or training. We've worked with the County Council and with the City Council to enhance the government's Kickstart scheme. So the 6 months placements for young people have been extended to 12 months, and there's an allocation of £500,000 towards that particular programme. We've also allocated modest resources towards our innovation strategy, that's the MIT REAP strategy, and also the low carbon delivery plan, so the action plan that we're preparing, which will really support the long-term economic growth strategy, which I'll come on to talk about. In terms of the Business Gateway Growth Hub, now this is the business-facing service of the LEP. It's been operational now for about 6 years. As expected, in 2020 and 2021, there was exponential growth in the number of inquiries that we received from businesses. We had a 212% increase in the number of businesses approaching the Business Gateway for support. Over 202 webinars were hosted virtually to support businesses. And in 2020 and 2021, we allocated just under £400,000 of grants to 27 businesses. Moving on to the next slide, the other key service offered through the LEP is the Careers Hub, and this is funded through the Careers and Enterprise Company. Effectively, this is to increase the number of interactions that young people have with enterprise and with industry. So we have a number of targets, the Gatsby benchmarks. We're working with probably over 90% of the schools now, and enterprise advisors are allocated to work with the principals of each school and college to develop a strategy in terms of future information, advice and guidance. That's a programme that has been supported by the Department for Education, and we've had confirmation that they will support financially for the next academic year, for this academic year. So the programme ends in August next year. In terms of the evidence base, one of the things that we've commissioned is a business tracker study. So on a weekly basis, we feed insight and intelligence both into local government, but also to BAYS. That's on a weekly basis. The tracker survey gives us a real insight into the business confidence in the area, the adoption of new technologies, new ways of working, the furlough scheme. So this is something that we will continue to commission on an ongoing basis to ensure we've got the most up-to-date and accurate information about how the local economy and businesses, business confidence is growing. Finally, in terms of governance, we've had some board changes So in the last financial year, the City Mayor stepped down as a director of the LEP board and has been replaced by Councillor Danny Myers, who has a portfolio for jobs and skills. Also, with the county leader also stepping down, Councillor Bedford has taken on the role of representing the county on the LEP board. In addition to that, Professor Bob Allison has left Loughborough University, so we went through a process with 3 universities and they have agreed to nominate Nishan Kanagarara, who's the Vice Chancellor at Leicester University, to represent higher education on the LEP board. Would you like me to stop there, Chair, in terms of the before I go on to the priorities for the next for this financial year?
Thank you, Mandip, and we'll see if members have any questions, comments. So, any questions, comments from members on that part of the presentation? Mr. Hunt.
Thank you. I'm going to sit back to the outputs and looking at the list of projects there, and it's an impressive range. You get the impression that the LEP is there to distribute or to recommend back bid. Government growth funds of various sorts exist. Do you go back and look at how they've turned out? I mean, these are the outcomes that you project. 4,000 new homes in off junction 23 would appear anyway. But do you go back and look and see how they've benefited the economy? Not just that project, but all of them.
Absolutely. So on a quarterly basis, we need to submit our output returns to government. So we work with the project sponsors on an ongoing basis to make sure that the business cases that they've submitted to secure the funds, that they're actually hitting those milestones and the outputs. So they're regularly monitored. We have to submit returns to government, as I say, on a quarterly basis. We have an investment panel, previously the programme board, which consists of 8 directors who monitor performance. So we present performance reports to the programme board and to the main LEP board on an ongoing basis.
And are those outcomes reported public? Because they're not in this report, in this report here. Would the County Council see those? I mean, are they published, or is it just internal after?
They are published on the website. All the programme board papers and the LEP board papers are open to the public scrutiny. So yes, they are available, and obviously with the County Council being represented on the LEP board and on the programme board formally, then yes, the County Council does have access.
So I think that's really important. I mean, this is a list of projects. What we really need to know is whether they've been successful in the end, and I appreciate some of them are long term. In terms of the junction 23, the 1.8 million allocation was actually not an extension of the project. It was to bail out the project because it was over budget. That would be correct, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there were obviously with the pandemic and the impact, then the construction costs, we're well aware, increased. And as a result, there was a few.
The construction costs were above what they'd been budgeted for. Yeah, and in terms of the sport park, who will own the building and take the rents from that? Would that be?
That will be the university.
The university. So universities benefited by £66 million non-educational funding, because they will collect the rents presumably from the government department, should the government department come to Loughborough. We don't know that yet, do we?
Well, we've had confirmation that the UK Anti-Doping Agency will relocate to Loughborough. In terms of, it was a strategic decision by the board to invest in this particular project because clearly Loughborough is the ideal place to develop that sporting body cluster. and there are already a number of bodies there, and there's certainly interest from other arm's length government bodies to relocate.
I mean, I concur with you that Loughborough is the ideal place, but as far as developing the county's economy, I have my doubts of whether office blocks for sports administrators, which is what this is, would do all that much. And it looks to me like the Getting Building Fund has just been, as it was, a sudden allocation of money to restart the economy. I think the Prime Minister described it at the time, and we were quite lucky in getting the £6 million. We had to spend it on something, and the sport park there was there to do it. But that's, I suppose, in the nature of the business of.
Can I just come in?
Of course you can, yeah.
I think the discussions around sport park are ongoing. I mean, I can remember meeting with the Cabinet Office. It's not. There we go. It's dead in there. I met with the Cabinet Office first, probably over 5 years ago, when they voiced a view that various departments were looking to relocate out of London and out of Whitehall. They made it clear that we needed a catalyst event to really stimulate more organisations moving, because there was a lot of resistance and reluctance to that. There was a requirement for a building of a specific size, and Loughborough University were happy to try and work to accommodate that. Obviously, Loughborough University was identified as the objective area because of its benefit, its abilities in this area. But it was also made very clear that if we could accommodate a specific department, organisation within government, then there would be a very strong likelihood that others would follow on the back of that. So therefore, we knew that the anti-doping was the lead, but behind that there were many others which aligned very closely with our objectives, not only in the LEP but in the county and the wider area. So the discussions around Sport Park have been going on for a long, long time. It was really the funds that were made available by government. We've always had a very healthy pipeline of projects. To give you an example, when we signed up for the 20 million, when we were allocated to 20 million, I think we had 95 million of projects that we could have put forward that all met the criteria that government had outlined. So we were quite disappointed to only be allocated 20 million, which didn't allow us to do some of the larger projects we wished to do. But actually, Sport Park was always a very key strategic objective for us to make that step forward and to work closely with government on the future opportunities.
Perhaps there's a communications issue here, because I mean, the anti-doping agency hasn't been mentioned in your publicity, as far as I know. And if it is a question of paying £6 million to get a government department, then that sounds like good value. If it was projected to be an extension, I think the fourth pavilion of 4 just looks like an extension of something which exists already. So, as you probably gathered, I'm concerned about gilding the lily of projects that have come through from government funding, and I'd really like to see some evidence of outputs achieved in reports in the future. But we'll come to the future as the next part of the presentation, I think. Thank you.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you. To add on to Max's comments in relation of outputs and how are they measured and are the benefit, it was one of my questions. But what I'd like to see as well, or if you can answer that, is the risk factor. We know that, for instance, it takes quite some time to get these projects through the system. But we know that, for instance, at the moment, building costs, etc., do increase on a daily basis. So if you have a 6 million project, it could potentially, to be delivered, cost you 6.5 or 7. So how do you build that risk factor in to ensure that they don't come back? Because alternatively, it could go on forever and ever while people coming back. So that's question 1. I've actually got 3. Now, I appreciate that projects will have to be put forward in order to be considered. However, how do we or you assure a fair geographical spread? Because if you're looking through there, you see Loughborough, you see Leicester, but I very rarely see Blaby, Hinckley, Market Harborough. So how is a geographical spread assured to ensure that all the ratepayers who've paid into the big pot see some benefit? And my last comment is in relation to skill shortages. Now, I know that previously, twice before, when we sat here, I have mentioned skill shortages of lorry drivers. It has now come to a sort of crescendo. I know somebody who approached the LEP to work through a training scheme, but they were refused. So what is the LEP actually doing to proactively go out there and work together with providers to train lorries, to fund training, which, as we know, is £3,000 plus an upkeep, etc., etc. So how are you proactive in dealing with skill shortages where it's actually needed, rather than just having a general, well, we're dealing with skill shortages where there is a focus? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page. So in response to your first question about how we manage the risks, so the business cases that are submitted by the project sponsors include contingencies. Inevitably, there will be additional costs. We have a finite resource, so project sponsors have to work within that funding envelope. But contingencies are actually built into particularly capital projects. If costs escalate above, then there will need to be an alternative funding source. So the majority of the projects that we fund, it's a funding package with a number of match funding partners. So those are scrutinised in detail before we present recommendations to the programme board or the investment panel, and then onto the board. So the projects are under scrutiny, but contingencies in the event that costs, particularly in relation to capital projects, do escalate, they are built into the projects, and they are, as I say, scrutinised before recommendations are made to the board. Your second question about the geography. It's fair to say that the local growth fund programme, there is a strong balance across districts and the city, but we do have a process that we go through, and that's set out in our local assurance framework. So we have an open call process. So when government announced that they are allocating funds to LEPs or devolving funds to local areas, we go through a process whereby we invite all partners to submit projects, local authorities, universities, colleges, and then we go through a rigorous Green Book appraisal process. And for capital projects in particular, we commission independent Green Book appraisal of those projects. Those are then scored, and those scores and appraisal conclusions are reported to the programme board, who then go on to make recommendations to the board. So there is a rigorous process that we go through. Now, we encourage obviously all partners to submit projects, but using Getting Building Fund as an example, there was a strict criteria that government set out in terms of the types of projects and the ability to spend. To spend £20 million in 24 months during a pandemic is extremely challenging. As Kevin alluded to, we had projects to the value of 95 million. We put them through that rigorous appraisal process, and it was these 4 projects that I mentioned that were agreed by the investment panel to recommend to the board, both in terms of strategic fit, but the economic case had to be absolutely robust to make sure that we can deliver. With the Getting Building Fund, if we don't spend £20 million by the end of March next year, it goes back into the Treasury.
If I may come back on that one, and by the way, very nice to see you. If, for instance, on some grant funding, and I have sat on some boards before, some say organisation, if they have come forward within a year or whatever, they can't come forward within the next year, or they're marked down, so they don't, say for instance that the same, Rosita Page can't come forward every year with a programme. Is there a criteria within your assessment that the same people do not come forward every year? And I know what you've just saying, and I've heard, but say if the city has got the projects but Labour hasn't, but is there a criteria that it says that if you've had already so many millions, you can't come back?
There isn't a criteria. The criteria for the funds that are channeled through the LEP are really set by government. So we don't have any discretion over how we utilise those funds because, as I say, the criteria is fairly strict in terms of the types of projects and also the ability to spend and the outputs. So the only discretionary fund that we do have is the Growing Places Fund. Now that's open and it is a loan fund, it's not a grant fund. So it really depends on the funding. Because we'd all like to be in a place where we have a single pot arrangement, as some LEP areas do, and Merrill combined authorities, where you've got a lot more discretion over which projects are approved. But the funding that we've been allocated, certainly over the last couple of years, the Getting Building Fund, very strict criteria in terms of deliverability is the key criteria that is applied to that.
If I could just add to that point, I would absolutely say categorically no. There is no sort of penalisation of anybody that's come forward and had funds before. And actually, when you look at it, a lot of the funding that the LEP has made in various forms over recent years has been very much aligned to some quite clear, specific strategic objectives that the LEP has set out, and whether they were part of the now sort of defunct or maybe resurrected local industrial strategy or whatever, they were seen as being very strategic objectives of Leicester and Leicestershire. So there's a very rigorous, I'm very keen on us having a very rigorous approach to how investment opportunities and certainly projects and funding is provided. But I think we've, in the last one, in terms of the Getting Building Fund, then frankly, the timeframes that we were provided with by government, fortunately, as a LEP, we were in a position that we had a strong pipeline of projects almost ready to go that we could complete, but the time frame we had to turn that around was ridiculously short. And many LEPs, I think, struggled because they didn't have that shovel-ready projects that the government had insisted on that could turn around and have investment in 18 months. We were fortunate to have that. And I see that pipeline and the strength of that pipeline going forward as a fundamental part of what the LEP is there in its capacity to do, is to ensure that we're fully aware of where these projects are and make sure that we've got a real abundance of them and a surplus so that we can invest whenever government is prepared to put money on the table.
The others got to be turned off.
On the point raised by Max and by Rosita regarding performance management, I think obviously it's the responsibilities of the board obviously to ensure that there is adequate performance management and that these projects are appraised, etc. So I'm more than happy if there are specific projects that Max, Rosita, whoever on the commission wishes to ask questions about in terms of the outputs from them, to go through me as your representative from the county council. I will then liaise with with Mandy and the team to ensure that you get the answers that you require on those. I'm just looking ahead in the report. It does look like page 71, for example, there are some kind of key outputs from some of this stuff that are put in the report. So I don't know if they're maybe preempting a little bit there, but happy to kind of be that link between the county council and the WEP, and to make sure those questions are answered.
Mr. Poland. Right, sorry, back to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that's well documented, and I recall the referral that you made, Councillor Page, into the LEP. Now, I think it's that understanding what ability the LEP has, and it's very much around lobbying and influencing. So we're well aware of the area being a magnet for the logistics sector, and having spoken with key employers in that sector, it is a challenge. We are promoting through our Careers Hub the opportunities through and changing the perceptions of that particular sector from an early age, through schools, through colleges, and influencing the curriculum. What we can't do is obviously influence national policy and regulation around HGV drivers. I know that there's a national programme now simplifying access to licensing, but we're acutely aware of the challenge, not just HGV drivers, but skill shortages across a number of the sectors that employ large volumes of people, logistics being one, the adult and social care sector being another one. So we're acutely aware, but I think it's that level of influence that the LEP has. We don't have, as I say, the financial resources to actually support that. So our role is very much to ensure that we gather that insight and intelligence, feed that back into those that make the decisions at that national level, and that's what we will continue to do so.
But Mandip, thank you for all of that, greatly appreciated, and as always you're doing a great job. But is there any possibility that as a LEP government can be lobbied? Because at the end of the day, we know it costs £3,000 for a lorry licence, then there's an update and an individual can't carry it. We at Harborough have used we're floating the government fund now to help with that. Is there no way that the LEP can lobby the government to provide some funding to an organisation like yourself, so that you can work with, operators who are doing that to pay for this, and then, to ensure, because quite often these people are put off on the word go because of the cost and then the continual on cost of that. So I'll just leave that thought with you, really.
Thank you, that's helpful. And as I say, the lobbying continues now. The framework for the UK Shared Prosperity Funds, which is a successor to the European funds, that will offer a degree of flexibility in terms of supporting those furthest from the labour market, but also supporting those sectors that are in that have demonstrated skill shortages. So we await the framework, which I understand is going to be launched alongside the Levelling Up white paper. So, but we will continue to lobby because it's certainly an issue for Leicester and Leicestershire in particular.
I think it's just worth reinforcing as well that yes, we do lobby. Whether a lone LEP voice gets heard in the corridors of power is another point. So we try and do that through a more joined up through the LEP network, which is a much stronger body than it was previously. It's much more effectively constituted now as a lobbying group, and with the various contacts with government departments, but also with local MPs. And I think the one area that we've very much tried to step up our involvement in lobbying in a coordinated way of late, and we've got an MPs roundtable later on this week, is to ensure that we get those messages across on a two-way basis that allow it to be heard, hopefully, at numerous contact points in Whitehall and Westminster. So it is very much a key strategic element of ours. Advanced logistics and logistics sector, as we know, is an enormous part of our growth strategy, and that's not just about putting up big sheds all over the county. This is about advanced logistics. It's the kind of stuff that we're doing with the Institute of Technology down at Myra as well. It's changing the face of that industry. And that's where I think we need, but there is an immediate need, absolutely. A lot of that could have been foreseen and forecast by what was going to happen, I think, with various changes we've seen in the economy in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, we are where we are, but we continue to lobby and will do so.
Okay, Mr. Poland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. The question I've got really, just really would be interested to get a bit more information about sort of how you work with schools and colleges and universities in terms of sort of the practicalities of that, and then in terms of how that, what the purpose of that is. So I noticed that you got the Future Me project for fairly young children, which I think is a great idea. I remember from when I was at school, there's sort of so many jobs out there that you're just not aware of until you're in the system in years from now, and you think, if I'd known that when I was 11 years old, that would have been fantastic. I could have made different decisions. But the other thing that really sort of interests me and motivates me is the opportunities for older people, so graduates, so let's say graduates, and giving them the experience to get into the job market after they leave. I always say having a degree might get you in the door of the interview, but actually it's going to be the experience that gets you the job, and I think that's very, very important. So I was just really wondering if you give me a bit more information again about how you work with schools and colleges, and if there's anything the LEP can do to really help businesses start graduate programs that can train local young people to obviously get into the businesses of the future.
I'll let Mandip come on to lots of the detail behind it, but I guess one of the key things I've always been very keen to see, and in my business and day to day, involved with graduates and school leavers on a day-to-day basis, I'm very keen that we close the linkages that I think are there between business, education, and understanding of the jobs market and the skills that are required. And I think if you look at a number of things which Mandip will outline, our objective has been to close that gap very much with what we've done in the LEP. I mean, the one event that I attend every year up until COVID's obviously hit is our event of having a networking of all the schools turning up on the Friday morning at the racecourse, and then having a great day of them understanding what the industries around Leicester and Leicestershire are. What industries we predominate in, which ones we have some great skill sets in, where their futures probably will lie, because most of the people coming out of education, not going into higher education, will probably end up in one of those key sectors that are already established. But do they know what that involves? Do they know what jobs can arise? And it's great to have other people who join me on that, people like Dr. Nick Katecha as well, who's obviously a board member, who will stand up and say that often you don't know the career path that's ahead of you, but these are the kind of options that are there. And the other key area I think is important for the LEP is to spell out what we think the future will look like. It's very difficult to predict, as we all know, but these are the established industries we have in Leicester and Leicestershire at the moment. But actually, these are the ones that we're really seeing investment in. And these are the ones, and this is the skill sets that probably those industries are going to need. So it's trying to educate both the schools and colleges themselves about that, but also to ensure that the pupils that are coming through understand what the work, environment's probably going to look like for them when they come forward. So I think us spelling out our future plans and where we see Leicester and Leicestershire moving forward as an economy is really important for people at that age to grasp. So that's where very much we try and do it at a strategic level. Yeah. Mandip will outline what we do at operational level.
And I think Kevin summarised that. I think in terms of the role of the LEP, it's connecting providers with business, and that's what the Careers and Enterprise Companies Careers Hub work that we do, and the Enterprise Advisor Network is to get business leaders to actually go into schools and talk to. Sometimes it's more difficult to change the hearts and minds of the teachers and the heads of schools as opposed to pupils, because I think we're moving away from this kind of sector focus whereby we're moving about different skill sets, so digital skills or processing. So if you understand processing, you can work in a food and drink sector same way as you could in an automotive sector. So I think we've developed a range of videos and toolkits and materials that we're sharing with schools, and they found that really valuable. And Kevin alluded to the annual speed networking event that we hold. That's 300 young people from the age of 11 up to 16 with 100 employers in a room, and they get to talk to employers on a one-to-one basis for 1 minute. Someone rings a bell, they move to the next table. So it's about that insight. We don't have any control over education budgets. What we can do is influence the curriculum, and that's what we're attempting to do now. In terms of skills placements, obviously there's been changes in apprenticeship, so we're promoting those. We've got a very SME, micro business dominated economy in Leicester and Leicestershire, and that's always presented a challenge, particularly promoting apprenticeships for a small organisation with 2 or 3 employees or up to 10. It's very difficult for them to actually navigate their way in terms of and see the benefits of taking on a level 2 or level 3 or 4 apprenticeship. So that's something that we're certainly promoting. As I mentioned, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund will hopefully allow us to actually get some funding to actually invest in some of the activities that we are promoting, but at this moment in time we don't have control over the budgets. What we have done is made very strong cases for investment in further education capital. So the project at Myra, that's a collaboration between schools, universities and colleges, whereby they're actually located in a technology park with employers the likes of Bosch, Rolls-Royce, Toyota, and we can see the benefit of that, and we'd like to replicate that, and we're through to stage 2 of the Institute of Technology bid. There will be another one in the East Midlands, and I'm confident that that will be in Leicester and Leicestershire. So we've got one collaborative bid between Loughborough University and College and Derby, very much focused on low carbon technologies, and the bid in the city with 2 universities and Leicester College, very much around engineering and space technology. So we've got 2 exciting bids, and I think it is that future gazing to see what future jobs will look like, and that's what we're trying to really get that level of awareness, particularly amongst not necessarily just the young people, but their parents as well.
Thank you very much for that. You talked about the employers. Forgive me, this might have been the jobs fair where you can get the college students with the younger ones with the employers. I think that's a really great idea. And when you say about some changing the mindsets potentially of the schools as much as I can completely sympathise with that. It was a good few years ago since I was in college, but at that time it was very much a funnel sort of attitude. You went GCSEs, you did your A levels, you then went on to university, and that's what you did. The sort of wider options weren't discussed in anything like the same depth. So having some sort of fair whereby employers can come and talk to the students at that level, see what the options are. Is university for you? Maybe university is not for you, and an alternative program would be that's more industry specific. I think it's a great idea. 300 is a good number. Is there any way we could up that to increase it? Is it just a capacity thing? Is it that schools not wanting to engage in that? Because obviously the more sort of young people we could get that are aware of their options and sort of even 15 years old when they're coming into GCSEs, which will influence A-level decisions, the better, really, from my point of view.
Yes, I would love to see us extend it beyond 300. It was probably one of the most daunting things I ever did, standing up at 8:30 in the morning trying to speak to 300 school children from. But I totally agree. I think this is exactly what we need to be doing. There's as much of an education piece, though, with the schools themselves and with the teachers. We've seen a big upsurge of schools and colleges that have come on board and working with the LEP now compared to where we were a few years ago. I think there's a lot more we can do. We'd love to be able to put more resource into that. As most organisations, it's a resource stretch is the issue. But I see that as something that I would love to be doing those on a more regular basis, 2 or 3 times a year. Whether we go for more than 300, I don't know if I could actually deal with that personally, but I think that's the limit. But actually, I think it's an event that we could replicate and do more widely, and I think we should do.
Any other comments, questions from members on that part of the presentation? If not, Mandip, do you want to carry on? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the priorities for this financial year, obviously they do follow on from the earlier slide. So in terms of strategy, our priority for the last 18 months was very much to prepare a short-term economic recovery plan. So we've been working as part of the Leicester and Leicestershire Resilience Forum. That plan was launched and published back in December. And that's very much around some of the tangible actions that we could deliver as a LEP, but also through our partners over the next 12 months. So it was really a bridge between our strategic economic plan, which ended in 2020, and the economic growth strategy, which I'll come on to talk to. So that the economic recovery plan was a priority. A number of actions were agreed, and the decision that the board made to repurpose just under £1.7 million of Growing Places Fund was in response to delivering the actions within that plan. We've also committed to doing a number of kind of research projects over the last 12 months. One is the business tracker, which I alluded to earlier. That's very much to make sure that we've got our finger on the pulse in terms of local business confidence and how the economy is performing. We've worked with the County Council in developing the natural capital evidence base to inform our future low carbon action plan, and also the sectoral research. So we're imminently going to publish 15 sector profiles, which effectively gives us a snapshot of how each of those sectors are performing. Now, those will be refreshed, but they also act as a place marketing tool, really demonstrating the diversity of our local economy and also the opportunities and the capabilities. So that's something that sits alongside the economic growth strategy, which I'll come on to briefly talk about. In terms of governance, this is something that the board committed to do this financial year. But given the LEP review, Kevin and I have discussed this, and it's something that we will no doubt revisit once we know what the outcome of the LEP review is. So we are committed to doing a governance review, but that will obviously need to be aligned to what the future function and role of the LEP will be after the governance review. In terms of the key capital programme for this financial year, the Get and Building Fund, so we've got to obviously deliver the 4 projects. They are on track. We have some slight concerns about one particular project, which I am meeting with colleagues next week around, but I'm confident that we will be able to defray the full allocation by the end of March next year. So I won't go into the detail of each of those projects because I covered them earlier. Similarly, the next slide, the Local Growth Fund, we continue to monitor, as Councillor Hunt said, the outputs of those with the capital projects in particular, the Junction 23 project. Clearly, the enabling infrastructure, you'd hope that then that will give the confidence for developers and obviously the acceleration of the development of the Science Park at Loughborough. Clearly, the zero carbon agenda is high up on our priority list, as it is with the Midlands Engine. So we're working alongside the Midlands Energy Hub and the Midlands Engine's recently published 10-point plan. As part of the Growing Places Fund repurposing, we've allocated some modest resource to develop our low carbon action plan. That's going to be a priority. It is a key pillar within our economic growth strategy, and clearly it's something that we're working very closely with County Council colleagues in developing that particular plan and making sure that we've got a strong pipeline of projects, and really to amplify the capabilities and the credentials that we've got in Leicester and Leicestershire around low carbon, particularly in Loughborough, the strengths within our universities, but also some of the cutting edge research and development that's happening, both in terms of battery powered vehicles, hydrogen. So that's certainly an area that we are promoting Leicester and Leicestershire as the place to invest for low carbon technologies. In terms of the enterprise zones, members will be aware that we've got 2 enterprise zones in Leicester and Leicestershire. The first one designated back in 2013, that's at Myra. And the second enterprise zone is the Loughborough and Leicester enterprise zone, which consists of 3 sites. Charnwood campus, very much focused on life sciences. Loughborough University Science and Enterprise Park, very much around the digital and low carbon sectors. And the waterside in the city, again, engineering and space technologies is a key focus. This really gives us a strong platform. One of the things when we were developing our local industrial strategy, we were very much middling when it came to productivity, because there was an over-reliance on some of the low-value sectors, logistics, food and drink, textiles in the city in particular. We made a conscious decision and a strategic decision that we've got fantastic universities with strong capabilities in these sectors, and we wanted to align those to our enterprise zones. And the investment that's now coming through, the first investment was made in March this year. And that was at Charnwood campus, and that's thanks to Charnwood Borough Council as the investing authority. That's going to create over 250 new jobs at Charnwood Molecular, and that will kickstart the development of that life sciences and medtech cluster in Charnwood. And we're looking to replicate that. So we are currently in discussions with Hinkley and Bosworth about investing in Myra Technology Park, and also with the city at Waterside. So it's been a while to agree the business rates agreements with the billing authorities, but now we're at a position where we can start investing. So it's very much, we don't have the cash in the bank. This is very much a commitment from the local authorities to actually borrow and invest against future business rates generation. So these are going to be flagship projects, and they are centerpieces within the economic growth strategy. And things are moving forward, as I say, with the first investment being made in Charnwood in March.
Mandy, can I just come in on that one? Because I think one of the things that became clear from discussions with government some years back was that there needed to be, in order for us to push forward Leicester and Leicestershire much more strongly, we needed to have a stronger place offering, by which I mean we needed to be able to go to government and say Leicester and Leicestershire are the world leaders, national leaders, can be the centre of excellence in these areas. In too many sectors, we were okay. You know, we ranked high, but we didn't actually stand out in anything. And what became clear in the last few years is that what government is looking for is centres of excellence and places that they can see technologies, especially innovation based and zero carbon based. So we've put a lot of investment and thought into creating Leicester and Leicestershire as that kind of go-to place. And I think I'd say it's a risky strategy by putting eggs into baskets, but actually you have to do it. Every LEP has done that. Every location has done that around the UK. I feel now that we're in a very strong position in those sectors that we stood behind, and we're seeing those investments coming through. And one of my objectives in particular as chair on the board, and I represent the East Midlands LEPs on the Midlands Engine Board, is to very much align the East Midlands and Leicester and Leicestershire's priorities with what the engine is saying, because the engine is a powerful vehicle in terms of access to government and lobbying. So therefore we have a very closely aligned now strategy for East Midlands LEPs, Leicester and Leicestershire within that, what part we play in the whole picture and how that all fits together at a wider Midlands level. And I think that's really important for us. And what it allows us to do now in terms of place marketing is to go out there and say Leicester and Leicestershire now stand out as a world leader, or certainly a national leader in these sectors and these areas which are going to grow. So I'm very pleased with how it's come on. Obviously, COVID and everything that's happened in the last 18 months has set things back slightly, but this is a long-term strategic plan that I believe will still benefit significantly the area as we move forward.
Just moving very quickly to the next couple of slides. Business Gateway, I mentioned, we've seen exponential growth in the number of inquiries. A range of products are now available through the Business Gateway, particularly as it might not come as a surprise, the most visited page is the funding page and the grant page. Helpfully, we're working with all our local authority partners with the additional revenue grants, so a range of financial assistance through national programmes that we're pushing out through the Business Gateway, working with our district colleagues and with the city. So we are expecting huge numbers of inquiries to continue. We've managed to secure additional resource from government. They've doubled from 250,000 up to £500,000 of resource for the Business Gateway. Again, it's relatively modest. We've matched that with European funds, so we've got 6 business advisors who actually go out and talk to businesses and develop tailor-made packages of support for them. So that will continue up until March next year, and we'll need to await the outcome of the LEP review as to what role the growth hubs will continue to play, if any, beyond March next year. But it's certainly a valuable resource. We've seen that through the feedback that we've had from businesses that have received support through the gateway. In terms of skills, I've talked about the Enterprise Advisor Network and the Careers Hub being funded for this academic year. That will continue. We've set some targets and milestones. We want to achieve 100% coverage. So every school, every college in the city and county has an Enterprise Advisor allocated and working with the head of school to develop an employment information advice and guidance strategy. The Skills Advisory Panel will continue to update local intelligence and the local skills report, which is due for refresh in the autumn. So that will continue. That group is in fact chaired by one of the board directors, who's principal of Leicester College, but it includes a number of the business representative organisations, the Chamber, the IOD, the CBI, etc. So we do have a lot of business input into shaping that skills plan. Those are the priorities for this financial year, which obviously align with the achievements that are set out in the annual report, which was published in June. Can I pause there, please, Chair, if there are any questions before we get on to the LEP review?
Thank you, Mandip. Do any members? Yes, Mrs. Page.
Thank you. I'd just like you to share a few thoughts with me. And again, it's several. One, within the priorities, we're talking, for instance, Phoenix, another office space creation. Now, with people having to have started to work from home, there is it's decreasing the need of office spaces. So will that be featured, or has that already been featured into your calculations? The other thing is, which always extremely concerns me, and I like your thoughts on that, please. It is, for instance, as you know, my division includes Magna Park, so I live and breathe Magna Park and logistics, and I know we have got a very low unemployment rate, and we cannot find any bodies to actually work. So you are talking about job creation, yet we're creating jobs and jobs, but we haven't got the people who fill the jobs. So, you know, where we're going to get them from. So how do you feature that in your discussion? Thought on that one, please. And the other thing it is, when I'm looking at your ambitions, and they're in Loughborough and their science centre, and they're making the city as the centre. Well, the city is very easily accessed from maybe Loughborough and Charnwood, and there are, you know, bus services. But for instance, the part of the world where I come from, Welford Road, Narborough Road, are totally screwed with bus lanes and whatever. So you can talk anybody. If you are wanting to go in the city, it takes you on a non-busy day an hour and a half. So what I do, and everybody else I know, we don't go to the city. We don't go to Loughborough, because we will go to Rugby. We will shop at Foss Park because it's the access. So are those thoughts featured into your equations? And I just, like to pick your brain on that. Thank you.
Okay, can I just come in on the Phoenix one first, because I think that's an interesting one to pick up on. As somebody running a business with 5,000 people, 40 offices and hybrid working in the professional services sector, I think it's very challenging and uncertain at the moment as to what people's work preferences are going to be as we move forward. And I actually think it's far too early to try and call that. I think we need to let people decide how they're going to want to accommodate hybrid working and how they do that going forward. But I would say that one of the part of the Phoenix model that was put forward was effectively that we would create what would be flexible workspace. Now, I wouldn't like for 1 minute to try and claim that we predicted what may be happening going forward, but actually now I feel that the workspace that will be available in the city, and we've seen this with other locations within the city, will be in very high demand, and probably will be something that will be repeated as a model moving forward. So I actually feel now that that development is a very strong development in many ways. I think it's a very needed development, but I actually feel that it will accommodate and suit ways of working going forward in a much more better way than maybe it would have done previously. So I think the whole thing about people returning to city centres, flexible working, is very difficult to call. We need to almost see how that will work out in coming times.
And within that thought, for instance, parking space levy, access to the city is very much inhibited. And whilst my other point of not getting the bodies, surely if we are looking at providing office spaces, but we're making travel into the town, not providing the parking spaces at a low cost, surely it disadvantages and prejudices people from rural areas who access lower skilled office jobs, because somebody who comes from my part of the world, and I know plenty who even used to work, say, in the shopping centre, can't afford to pay because the parking fee at this present time already is as high as maybe their daily wages. So they cannot work in the city. So how does that square the circle from your professional point of view?
Well, as somebody who set up 2 offices in the city centre and ran them and then decided to leave the city centre simply because it was taking too long for my people to get in and they couldn't park when they got there, I think you can probably see where my views are on that. But actually, it is something that I think, the one thing I would say on this, and I think this is a wider discussion, is the role of city centres and what city centres need to provide to the people around them and within them going forward. And I think it's a much wider and bigger debate. I'm certainly not going to get into city transport policies because that's nothing that I do get involved in, and I don't really want to comment on that. But I think we need to ensure that we understand what the role of the city centre is, what part it plays, and we want to make sure it is accessible to everybody, not only for business purposes, but for cultural, for social, educational purposes as well. So I think it's a much wider debate than, I'd love to have that debate, and I'm sure we will be doing that going forward, but it's not one.
But I'm glad you've got my point about accessing the offices and the cost. jobs, how do you know, my other point.
Yeah, in terms of jobs, clearly our ambition has changed. Well, it changed from when we developed our strategic economic plan. At that point, in 2014, we had over 35,000 people on out of work benefits. Before the pandemic, I think we reached a point where we just had just under 7,000 people on out of work benefits. We're now back at that level we were in 2014. So the latest statistics, I think we've got about 38,000 people on out of work benefits. So there are people looking for work. The challenge for us is making sure those people are reskilled in the types of jobs that are available. And I take your point about logistics in particular. I've visited Amazon a couple of years ago, and I think it is very much around the perception. It's not order picking, shelf stacking. Yes, they still need forklift truck drivers, but the director of HR there was saying what they're crying out for is software engineers and developers. And I think given the fact that we've got 3 universities that specialise in digital and generate 17,000 graduates each year, I think there's a huge opportunity here for us to retain as many graduates from our 3 universities as possible into those high value jobs. There will still be a requirement for a workforce for those large volume employing sectors like social care and logistics to a certain extent. But I think that's part of the challenge. We do have a number of people on out of work benefits, and it's making sure that we've got the right infrastructure in place to make sure that we can give them the skills to access those opportunities. So it is going to be a challenge across all sectors, but we're acutely aware through our skills report where those kind of cliff edges are, particularly with certain sectors. And I take the point around obviously Magnet Park and accessibility. That is a challenge, and we've got to find some transport solutions to get younger people to those jobs, particularly from the city. It's not very easy to get people from the city all the way out to Lutterworth.
I think the other thing to add in terms of attraction of, I come back to the point about making Leicester and Leicestershire the place where people want their business to be and where they want to live. There's a lot here about place marketing and putting Leicester and Leicestershire out there, which will attract in the people that we want to see coming into the city and the county who can accommodate some of the skilled jobs that we need. If we've got those people in our locale, fantastic. I'm hoping that those people can be further skilled and attracted to take those roles on. But actually, we also need to bring in talent into the city and county as well to help us move forward, and we need to be an attractive place to do that. And I think that comes back to the whole remit around ensuring that all parties involved make Leicester and Leicestershire the place where people want to be, and that will attract those talent. And we're seeing that now with Space Park. I mean, I've had a number of discussions recently with representatives on Space Park. We're already seeing some very significant businesses now. There were always significant businesses that wanted to be part of that, but now putting their name forward. I've spoken with a number of them, and they would be coming here to recruit locally and hopefully also to recruit from, bring specialist skills in from all parts of the world. So I think it's a sort of multifaceted approach to this. I think, we've got a lot to do on our own skills and upskilling. There are unemployed people or people out of work who should be able to be skilled up to take on more roles. But we also need to ensure we're attracting the best talent from all parts of the world and from the UK. And I think over time, will we ever get to the perfect situation? Probably not, but I think there's a lot that we can do joined up together. And the LEP's role very much is to pull all those parties together to attract that.
Because in many cases you get workers who go into factories or whatever, and the conditions are not conducive, for them wishing to carry on that job, or indeed, the management isn't supportive or whatever. So the whole thing is holistic from the roots right up. Thank you for your comments, by the way.
Yeah, and I agree that we have a lot to do in terms of, in the last 18 months, there's been some fairly bad publicity, as we know, in terms of some of the businesses operating in our locale, and there's a role there for everybody to educate those businesses, isn't there, and to make sure that we take those blots on our landscape out, because they do a lot of harm. We can do lots of good work in attracting people in, but it only takes one story or one bad employer to actually put us backwards a lot. And I think we've got an obligation and a duty to ensure we all try and do that, and I think that's everybody around this table and other tables.
Any other comments, questions from members? No? Okay, back to you, Mandy.
Okay. This is just one slide. As Kevin alluded to, in March, alongside the budget, the government announced that they will be undertaking a central-led review of LEPs. The expectation was that ministers would be making a statement before recess on the 22nd of July. But that hasn't been the case. The LEP review and the outcome of the review is now aligned to the publication of the Levelling Up White Paper and the spending review in the autumn. Now, in slightly different seasons in government, so my understanding is that we're looking at towards the end of November, early December, before the White Paper is published and the spending review date announced. So in terms of our role in the review, so we're working as part of the LEP network, working with officials, and one of the things that has been discussed with officials is about the future role and functions of LEPs, and clearly the March budget, the announcement about the Levelling Up Fund, the 4.8 billion, that funding will be not allocated, but it will be available for local authorities to competitively bid into. And I know that certainly the county districts and the city have put forward bids supported by their local MP into government. My understanding is that the announcements on those successful bids will be alongside the white paper. So as far as the capital funding is concerned, I think it's something that all LEPs expected, that capital funding will be channeled through local authorities as opposed to LEPs going forward. So that really brings us to the kind of future functions of LEPs, and it's those areas that we've discussed this morning around skills, around innovation and business support. Those functions have been discussed with officials. They've been well received by ministers. So there are kind of four key areas where certainly government are negotiating with LEPs in terms of future role or evolution of LEPs. One is around the strategic function, which we've talked about in terms of the role of LEPs in convening local partners, so the public-private sector, further higher education and the voluntary and community sector, to bring those all those interests together and to develop an overarching strategic framework for the area, which is what we're doing and then spent the last 6 months preparing. The second area is around local sectors and industries and having that local insight and intelligence and feeding that into local plans, feeding it into national government and national policy, and really having that expertise and that local knowledge at a place level. The third area is around tailored business support, and this is very much aligned to the work that the Growth Hub in particular has been doing over the last 18 months in response to the pandemic, but also the support offered to businesses as part of the EU transition. And the final area of future role of LEPs is the existing projects. Yes, there may well not be future capital programs that are channeled through LEPs, but there are legacy projects. So we've still got a revolving loan fund, the Growing Places Fund. Our engagement in strategic projects like the Town Deal and also the Freeport and future successor to European funds. So those are the kind of 4 key areas that have been put forward to officials who have briefed ministers. I understand there's a meeting between officials and ministers tomorrow, and I'm on a call on Friday. So we don't know what the outcome of the review is going to be. There's been a lot of speculation. Clearly, this has been quite unsettling for certainly my team. We've seen that through significant changes in senior management. So my priority is to obviously keep the kind of confidence levels high within the team, keep them motivated. And I'm quietly confident that there will be a kind of future role for LEPs, but it won't be as it has been over the last 10 years, certainly since I've been involved around the capital projects. But those 3 core areas around skills, innovation and business support, I very much see as the role for future LEPs. Now, there's obviously, as part of the LEP review, there's discussions about geography, but there still seems to be a drive for the boundaries to be around economically functional areas. I think Leicestershire is probably one of the most economically functional areas in the country. Nearly 90% of people live and work in the area. So we'll have to just wait and see. We have a campaign at a national level being led by the LEP network. As Kevin mentioned, we have a meeting with our MPs a week on Friday. A number of materials have been produced by the LEP network, which we'll be using. So I'll be writing to all the MPs by the end of this week with the letter template, which is developed by the LEP network. So again, we wouldn't have thought where we'd be 10 years from now. I think 10 years LEPs outlived regional development agencies, but clearly ministers have a different view. But we'll, as I say, the timeline for the review and the outcome is now aligned to the Levelling Up white paper.
Thank you, Mandip. Mr. Galton.
Thank you for that. Difficult to understand fully the thinking behind that. But do you have any inkling then where those functions would go to that you currently undertake if this came? You know, has there been any consultation on where those roles would transfer to?
I think the main area, if we look at where a lot of our discussions have focused on today, have been around those sort of capital projects and capital funding. And I personally, a personal view of mine as being involved with the LEP and chairing this board of the LEP is that I actually am not too concerned about that at all, because I think a lot of the resource within the LEP and a lot of our time and energy was spent overseeing and dealing with those type of projects. And in truth, I'm not absolutely certain that LEPs really had a lot of the infrastructures in place to do a lot of that. I think it'd be merged over time. So I think that area obviously will go out to organisations like yourselves and district councils and be done much more centrally. I think the key area that government has taken some time to grasp really here is the role that probably, and it's why LEPs were set up, were to be in that central partnership making position. And I think that is something that needs to be reinforced, and making sure that stakeholders all come together, because I think that's what makes things happen. And so I think there'll be a lot more convening responsibility on LEPs, a lot more strategic role, as Mandip mentioned, about aligning it to the key objectives of the area. I think as long as LEPs have an opportunity to make a difference in some way, if I look at the board members who sit around the table, private sector board members, all of them to a man stroke woman would say that they are there to make a difference and to play a part in that. But they also need to have a degree of not feeling that we are just there to deliver what has been determined elsewhere. And that's a very strong message coming through. You've got some quite influential and frankly, you know, well remunerated, well demanded people who sit around LEP board tables, and their desire is to stay doing that. But they need to be feel that they are employed in the position of bringing their skills, knowledge to the table. So it's not really a full answer to your question, but I think that'll be the main part that's taken away from LEPS in my view, which is probably not a bad thing. But it needed a refocus, and I'm quite happy in that regard that we get a refocus onto, you know, we're 10 years in. 10 years is a long time. A lot's changed in 10 years. What is the real function and role of LEPS now? What part can they play? I'm certain there is a big role to play, but it needs to be very clear, and we need to make that clearer to all stakeholders. I think there's still a proportion of people in the city and the county who don't really understand the role of LEP. You could say that's a failure on LEPS not to get that message out, but I think we need to just reinforce that, and maybe we need a narrower remit, and that will allow us to do it. So other areas, Mandip, that you see that the LEP may...
Yeah, certainly the role that the growth hubs have played over the last 18 months during the pandemic and the EU transition. So, and we've seen that, and it's been well received by ministers. I think there's recognition that the growth hubs, being a single point at which a business can access all publicly funded business support, is an area which I believe LEPS will continue to kind of lead on. Some supercharged growth hubs, whether it's across the current geography, we don't know. There are national business support programs which are, let's say, run nationally, but we've got some key programs at a local level which are funded through the business rates pool, through the additional restrictions grant through the local authorities that we're channeling through the growth hubs. So so I very much see it from a business support, that convening role, that strategic role, but also so we've still got 4 sites in our enterprise zones. So that role in terms of developing clusters around local capabilities is the other area. So and the careers hub, I think that's extremely important, because I mentioned economically functional areas. Now, travel to work is different, but travel to learn, you will not get young people travelling outside of Leicester and Leicestershire to access school or A-level or level 2 level education. So certainly from a careers hub perspective and the growth hub perspective, I very much see that being the role. And I agree with Kevin. I think the restrictions on the capital funding that were placed with the local growth fund, for example. Now, the key contributor to the local growth fund, £1 billion, was DFT. Now, DFT wanted to see transport projects. Well, it's for the highways authorities to actually deliver those. So it's no surprise that a lot of the funding went to the city and county council's highway projects. So we effectively acted as kind of bankers. So that's not really a role, and it did take a lot of resource to manage those programs. So that's certainly an area that I think my biggest concern about the Levelling Up Fund is the competitive nature and the centralised approach that government is applying, that they will be using. It's a competitive approach. Local authorities have to bid in centrally, and then decisions are being made in Whitehall as opposed to at a place level.
Any more questions, comments from members? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for a very detailed presentation today and for taking lots of questions. Did anybody, Mandip, Kevin, Tom, Mr. Bedford, have any more comments that they wanted to make?
I'll just refer to the final 2 slides, Chair, if I may, and that's, I mentioned a couple of times the economic growth strategy. That's something that we've spent the last 6 months developing the evidence base which underpins the strategy. It's a long-term strategy up to 2030. Kevin mentioned the local industrial strategy. Now, that was a different process. That was a co-designed strategy with government. Now, this particular document and framework doesn't have any status. We're not submitting it to government, but it does provide a framework for partners to bid for levelling up funds directly to government institutes of technology, T-level capital bids. So it's very much a framework. Now, in terms of the consultation period ran from the 1st of July till the end of July, so we received over 50 responses, and very detailed responses from the city and the county councils, at which we've now tried to incorporate as many as we can into the document. It's been presented to the board on the 21st of September before it's been published. But what I would just refer to is it's very much built on around 4 pillars about Leicester and Leicestershire being productive, inclusive, innovative and sustainable. Those are the 4 pillars, and there are a number of priorities. So it is a high-level strategy. We've had a number of comments about, well, all well and good having a strategy, but how are you going to deliver? And as I say, until we know what the outcome of the LEP review is, the spending review and the levelling up white paper, we won't know. So at this moment in time, it's a high-level framework which really amplifies the capabilities of the local area, which we've talked about, the key sectors that are really going to drive productivity, but recognising that inclusive growth is extremely important alongside the net carbon net zero targets. So it is a framework, and we will be, once things become a bit clearer in terms of the national policy and the funding landscape, then we are looking to develop investment plans and action plans which sit beneath the strategy. So as I say, it's going to the board on the 21st, and I'm sure Peter will share it with colleagues, both officers and members of the county council, but it will be published after the 21st of September.
Right, no more comments. Thank you very much to Mandip, Kevin, Tom and Mr Bedford for coming today, and to members for their questions and comments. Do members want to take a 10-minute comfort break before the next item? What's the consensus? 2 minutes. Well, should we say 5 minutes then? We reassemble at 12:50. I think we've got 12:41 now. Welcome back, members. So item 12 is our final item for the report on strategic planning and growth related matters, which is at pages 79 to 92 of your packs. Tom Purnell, the Assistant Chief Executive, will be presenting this item and is also joined by Simon Lawrence, Head of the Growth Service and Major Projects, and Sharon Wiggins, Strategic Planning Manager, as well as Mr Rob Thornhill, the Joint Strategic Planning Manager for Leicester and Leicestershire. Welcome everyone for joining us, and thank you for joining us today. I believe Mr Brecken's here as well for this item. So Tom, did you want to introduce this item? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and conscious of time, so I will keep my introductory comments fairly brief. What I plan to do is to just provide a brief high-level introduction to the paper before opening up to questions. Members of the Commission will be aware of the substantial level of population growth predicted in the county over the next 25 years, and associated with that the need to accommodate housing and employment growth, and specifically for the county council to provide support in infrastructure. The council's growth service, headed up by Simon, and Sharon's a member of the growth service, has been established to better manage the council's contribution to that agenda of growth, and also to manage the financial risks that growth brings to the council. The growth agenda is a complex one with lots of individual component parts. It's also a fast changing agenda. I think paragraph 10 of the report in front of you lists the various things that have changed since November last year when you considered the Leicester City Local Plan, and that's quite a long list of fairly significant issues. So lots happening. So we did think that it'd be useful to bring to you a report that's designed to provide a high-level overview of that system so that you can see what that looks like, and hopefully you can see how the individual parts within it relate to each other. What we haven't done is provided lots and lots of detail on each of those individual parts, because that's not really the purpose of the report. So the two main purposes of the report: to describe the current strategic planning policy issues that exist for our area. So that covers the national agenda, national policy, work at the Leicester and Leicestershire level, which of course Rob leads, working to the MAG, local planning work, and other theme-specific work, for example, on transport and on zero carbon. And secondly, the purpose is to set out how the council is engaging with those issues. That's now coordinated through the growth service, which is developing and has developed positive working relationships with district councils and other partners, and explicitly engaging at an earlier stage with district councils on their local plans. So as I said, the overall approach to provide a strategic overview without going into too much detail on the individual components, but of course the four of us will be happy to answer any questions on those individual elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Over to members. Any questions, comments? Mr. Gold.
Oh, I hesitate to start on this one, Chair, because this report has been a long time coming, and we actually kicked it off before asking for it before the elections. But I think, as Tom has indicated, there's so much change going on and change likely to come. It's very difficult at any one time to understand everything that's going on and what the impact of that is going to be. I would start by saying this report is very good in setting out the current situation, what's happened, the changes that are in the pipeline, and how they are being addressed. And it is at a high level, but of course in the end it will impact on our localities, both districts and communities. And I think the biggest thing I'd like to focus on, which has been driving so much of this, is this situation in Leicester and what is going to happen there in terms of the unmet need. I mean, really, the Secretary of State, some would say pulled a masterstroke, others would say he's pulled the wool over the eyes of a lot of people, including MPs, because there was a backlash when the housing numbers were originally uplifted. I think it's said here that all but Melton would have took a significant increase. There was a huge political backlash on that from the south of England and so on and so forth. And so they agreed to change it by giving this significant uplift, 35% uplift to 20 largest cities and urban areas. Of course, what wasn't said at the time, that most of those areas, I think all bar one, it would be impossible for them to accommodate that level of growth because of the constraints that those cities have. And Leicester is obviously, can't avoid that, is in that position. They just cannot accommodate. They don't tightly drawn boundaries of the city couldn't accommodate the previous figures, never mind a 35% uplift. So we kind of went from a situation of a panic in terms of the impact on the districts, and we've gone in full circle because there's still going to be a huge impact on the districts of having to take this uplift. And in the previous report, a number of members referred to the changing situation in the city, and we can all see it. I mean, I think Rosie said we don't go there because of various issues, but also I think a lot of people don't go there and haven't wanted to go there in the last year because of the threat COVID of large numbers of people gathering in an area. People in the city obviously working from home as per the rest of us. So if you do go to the city, that you can see massive change taking there in terms of retail, in terms of employment and so on. And I don't know how they're going to address that in terms of trying to get some life back into the city. But surely one way to do it is to have another look at housing. Manchester, if you go to Manchester, they have successfully got people living in the city, and it's not just the nighttime economy. There are actually people living there who don't commute in and out, and that to me is the difference. Their success in comparison to Leicester, which becomes pretty empty and dormant, and that has been exacerbated by the COVID. But anyway, we've got to pick up the consequences of that. So what I really wanted to address is this work that's going on, that's referred to various times in the report, commissioning new work to look at how that unmet need is going to be addressed. And there was a reluctance. There was a particular reluctance by Trevor, sorry to pick on Trevor when he was the past chair of the MAG. I'm sure he wants to defend himself as to whether this was really an acceptance that the strategic growth plan was no longer fit for purpose. And if you read all the changes in this report, it's very hard to say anything other than life's moved on since the strategic growth plan was agreed. The changes are so significant that actually it required a review, but nobody wanted to call it a review. Everyone said, oh, we're just going to have a look at it and we'll see if the review's needed and so on. What's set out here, to my mind, has to end up being a review of the strategic growth plan and what underpinned that. Some of it still holds, I would agree. But for my concern, is obviously the fact that there isn't going to be a A46 expressway, and yet, as envisaged, the plan still wanted to carry on with allocating, 30-odd thousand houses around the south and east of Leicester. And the big concern has obviously been without the infrastructure to support it. Now, I appreciate part of that is looking at a transport assessment of a more local road, but we've heard again earlier today the mounting costs of the Melton situation. 35 million is it over now what was originally assessed. Look at the distance of that road around Melton as opposed to the distance of a road that might go from the M1 round to Syston, some sort of eastern bypass, or as it was to be called, the expressway. Even if it was a single carriageway road, I shudder to think that the cost of that, again, comparison in miles to Melton, and yet everything we're being told is addressing this issue of delivering infrastructure, the risks to the county council as the transport authority in this issue. So I remain very sceptical about how that number of houses can be delivered around the south and east of Leicester, and how that infrastructure can realistically be afforded or put in place, the timescales for doing that. We'll have to see what comes out of this work, but I think if there's one thing I would like to understand today is, is there now an acceptance that this is a more root and branch review of the strategic growth plan that does actually need to start again on looking at distribution and how we're going to meet this this unmet need in Leicester. We've recognised that we can't just keep doing what we've done in the past, 2,000 houses on the edge of Blaby, 2,000 houses here, 1,000 houses on the edge of Scraptoff, wherever it might be. Got to look at something more fundamental. I would say that Blaby has started to address that. They seem to be saying we need to protect existing communities from excessive development, and therefore they're looking at freestanding settlements as a better way forward. I think that's the debate, the debate we need to be having, and how we can influence that. We just can't keep going, bolting add-on and adding on to those communities, particularly those communities on the edge of Leicester. We do need a fresh approach. I recognise that, but I also think we've virtually got to go back to the drawing board of how we're going to distribute these large numbers of houses. That's really all I want to say, and I know I've raised a lot of wide issues and there's a lot of work going on, but that's the challenge as I see it. But I would thank the officers for bringing this report, setting out where we are. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Galton. In terms of the growth plan itself, when you zoom out away from any of the detail on it, basically it focuses growth towards Leicester, recognises it as a central city, albeit with a bit more of a south and east focus. It recognises the role of the market towns as well, and focuses growth in key areas, one of which is in northwest Leicestershire, in and around, I suppose, what has become the Freeport Devco area. Obviously it spreads a bit more wider, recognises the important role of the A5 corridor as well, and recognises Melton as well, and all the work that's going on there. When you look at, I suppose, almost a post-COVID world, people are going to need to live close to Leicester for various reasons. All right, its role's changing, but people will still need to work in that area. People need to get in and out of Leicester, of course, which is a challenge. The A5 corridor, with its focus on distribution growth and Myra, again, all sectors that you would expect to grow and I suppose flourish in the future. Similarly with the Freeport and Devco in the northwest Leicestershire area as well. Again, a focus for economic activity now and obviously in the future as well. And the market towns, of course, have a key role to play. So actually, if you zoom out and don't get too focused in on specifics around whether there's a road around the south and east of Leicester or not, those areas are all going to need to grow and accommodate both housing and employment in the future. That said, we are doing some more detailed work, as you've alluded to, one of which is a strategic transport assessment. And I think, you know, if I had my time again, we could have been clearer as a partnership on the alternatives in that respect. So we've commissioned that piece of work that will report out probably early in the new year, and that will look at different ways to distribute growth across Leicester from the transport perspective. It might support the strategic growth plan, it might not. We might need to update the growth plan at some point, or we might not, or it might just be a partial review of that. But that evidence, along with the other pieces of evidence, will of course look at this in a very, well, as comprehensive as we've ever looked at it way, and give us a steer as to what way we need to go into the future. I think you really need to be aware, though, that the strategic planning context has changed in as far as the strategic growth plan sets out a long-term vision from 2031 all the way out to 2050. With the 35% uplift in Leicester, what we've got is an immediate unmet need issue. So it's not simply reviewing the strategic growth plan, it's how do we deal with Leicester's unmet need now, effectively, that needs to be addressed. And in some respects, that can't be reliant on a long-term, very large strategic site, heavy infrastructure focus. We're going to need to transition towards something like, if we are going to go with strategic sites that require infrastructure, we're going to need to transition towards an approach in the longer term. So dealing with Leicester's unmet need in the immediate short term, it might not look exactly as it does in the growth plan. And in many respects, in some respects it won't, because the need in Leicester and Leicestershire is much higher than the growth plan plans for. So I appreciate the figures in there seem daunting to people, but they're now much higher. So the challenge is only going to get bigger, not smaller, which is why we need to do this work and we need to plan collectively for it.
Okay, and Mr. Pendleton, did you?
Thank you, Chairman. I think Rob's answered really the main thrust which you gave, and effectively has articulated the reason why you couldn't have got any movement any earlier, because it was a very and is a very shifting scene. You know, I think what you have to keep sight of is the fact that you've got local authorities, districts and boroughs who are top down charged with producing specific housing numbers, and you can't shift the housing numbers hugely from one district or borough council to another. So when you look at putting in a very big infrastructure, we'll call it your A46 down there, that is a good way of trying to access funds nationally. If you can't access funds nationally, it still doesn't take away the fact that those housing needs and infrastructure is still required. And what you have to do then is provide a slightly lesser infrastructure to service the housing needs. That doesn't require you to throw the plan out of the window. It simply requires you to address what you actually have to deal with at the time. I'm absolutely delighted to hear that we are actually looking at trying to accommodate the city's need, because it really is a problem for the city. And it's going to be a problem for each of the district and boroughs. On that basis, I think, you know, MAG, with its duty to cooperate, is in the prime position to do the best it can, and then to work out where the major infrastructure will need to go. And that is indeed a changing picture, but it will change again, I'm sure. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we should be very positive about this in some ways. Leicestershire is unique, as far as I'm aware. We have 9 authorities who are sitting together, working together for what they are trying to do for the benefit of all residents of Leicester and Leicestershire. You know, and if the chairman will give me the slight discretion just to briefly sort of go away from, with my county council happens to being current chairman of the members advisory group. You know, as chairman, I was delighted when the leader of this council chose to join the MAG to personally represent the county council, because that's how important the leader of this council views the impact that this could have. And you know, the members advisory group is attended by the leaders of all councils, irrespective of party. So you have a group of like-minded people who recognise that we can't run away from the debate on the number of houses because they're given to us. We know the knowns. We know the number of houses. We know how many we've got to build. We know what the figures are. The unknowns are how do we accommodate them. And therefore, what we're trying to do, and I think the thrust of this is exactly right, is trying to work together to how best to accommodate them, bearing in mind the strictures that both our districts have and we have as a highways authority in providing the infrastructure to support that. So to me, you know, there are bigger issues here than just house numbers. You know, I look at this and I think of I think whichever paragraph it is. I mean, you know, no one can dispute our goals in terms of our economic plan, which I think are mentioned in. Forgive me if I can't find it. It was near the top somewhere, wasn't it? Yeah, the county council strategic plan. Sorry, you know, strong economy, local plans, etc. But again, affordable and quality homes. You know, what worries me slightly more is that with the government's first home policy and with the need for infrastructure, we may see a diminution in the provision of affordable homes just because of the needs of infrastructure over that. And it's how we square those circles. And the only way we're going to square those circles is by working together. Now, we talk at this council about our problems in raising funds for infrastructure. Well, one of the ways around that is if we can look at the bigger self-sustainable developments, and if we can get a promoter with deep pockets, as we had near me at New Loversthorpe, who put the infrastructure in, it means the county don't need to provide the money, but they can then take over and adopt the facilities because they will be built to standard. So, you know, it's easy to say that we keep on needing to adjust a plan. The strategic growth plan, I think, as Rob has said, there is nothing wrong with it. It just relates to, no, everybody got hung up over a southern relief road, but come what may, there will be a road there of some description. It probably may not be the right road to take. The volume of traffic might be the problem. So what we all need to do is to actually accept that we need to build these number of homes and take on the business. We need to work together on how best to locate it. And we need to fight tooth and nail, all of us working together, which I think is what the MAG does and what this paper says, to attract the finance to achieve it in the best possible way. In fact, I gave a talk to a local Rotary club yesterday about planning, weirdly, and I sometimes describe it as providing the least worst alternative. And so, in fact, what faces us is providing the least worst alternative. What I do know is the commitment of this council through its leader being now a member of the MAG, and the commitment of all the other members of the MAG, including the city mayor who attends, is undoubted in wanting to achieve the best for the city and the county within the constraints put upon us by central government, which we can't know. And I far rather that system of at least we're in decision rather than perhaps the one that your own party put forward in its last manifesto, is that they were going to build 10 garden cities. They weren't going to tell anyone where they were going, and they were going to take planning powers away from those areas where they intended to build the garden cities, so they couldn't object. It might be imperfect, but I'd rather we, as elected representatives, were in as much charge as possible in determining where these things go, and take the blame for it.
Do any other members have any comments, Mrs. Page?
Thank you. MAC might be a lot of like-minded people that represent a strategic view, but a lot of the general public out there doesn't necessarily agree, and we all know that. And yes, I do appreciate that we can't stop development, but it's got to be responsible development, and it has got to have the necessary infrastructure. I'm not about to make a speech. I am going to ask Rob a couple of questions, if I may, Rob. First of all, you are talking about the employment needs assessment and the HEDNA. It says it's discussed later in the date in this report, but can you talk me a little bit around that, and when are the new figures coming out, and how will it all impede? Tell me a little bit more about where we're at with the numbers of the city, because you know, I personally am not delighted to meet the city's need, because within our local plan we've already did, and I have got to justify that to my residents. So just an idea where we are with that. The other thing is, which of course you can imagine, I've just pulled this off and for ease and confused everything. Okay, the other things, it is what are likely the revisions to the planning network, the new ones, and the design code consultations, how they're going to impact on us, because I think that is very important to know. And my major point, it is, well, no, I've got two more points, sorry. One, it is the environment and carbon zero. Yes, we are working with partners, and I think if we are having to deliver this amount of housing, we must make sure they all and within our local plans are the relevant policies that ensure us as a local authority to enforce those policies. Now, I have been part of the local plan and planning since the year dot, and Simon will back me up. We used to have a policy that was to have solar panels, toilet water flush, or maybe, but then the government inspector insisted that we took it out of the local plan and we couldn't enforce it. And I don't think we can go forward with a carbon zero agenda when our major policies are about building houses, but the developers can just simply get away with it because it's too expensive. So how can we influence, make our policies as the MAC, have all of the same policies in our local plan, and then, you know, stick to it. And when, and you see, if Harbour puts it in, but Charnwood doesn't, Harbour hasn't got a leg to stand on. So talk me through that and how we can influence our MPs to ensure that those policies can be followed through. And my last point, it is the strategic warehouse and logistics study. Now, I know it was published, and it absolutely, to me, beggars belief, because I always confuse my acres and hectares, so excuse me for it. But originally, the need assessment many years ago was about 80 hectares or acres. That then, due to pressure and two applications being submitted in the district I represent, was doubled. Then the third developer came in and really made a meal of it. And instead of 160 hectare or acres, we had to provide 543, which is in the local plan. Planning permission was granted, and you know all about it, which was well over the Leicestershire and I believe even East Midland needs. So, and I cannot see how an independent study, but a study always throws up what you ask it, says that we have another need of 780,000 square meters of and 390 of well, of the rail, I can understand, yes, maybe, but 392 of road-based warehousing. How did we get to that? And how does that a study come to put this shortfall forward? So just talk me around all of these, and I'm sure I'll come back with some other points. Thank you, Rob, and as always, nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Page. So in terms of the housing and economic needs assessment, obviously that work is ongoing at the moment. That will look at a range of things very similar in many respects to the HEDNA did in 2017. So it will look, but it won't look at the need for housing specifically, because the standard method has kind of superseded that role, the government standard method for calculating housing need. It will look at housing mix. It will look at the need for employment, land and growth as well. And the forecast, the economic forecast that it uses are done by Cambridge Economics, and they underpin the work on the LEP's economic growth plan as well. So it's probably the first time across Leicester and Leicestershire that we'll have consistent, at least based forecast based evidence on the planning side as well as on the economic development side, which is hugely helpful. It will look as well at the number of homes needed to provide workers for the jobs and economic growth that's forecast, and that's quite an important point because it will help to make sure that the number of homes that authorities are planning for are sufficient, I suppose, to, in many respects, meet a lot of the aspirations in the economic recovery plan. And again, we've not been in that position before as a group of authorities. It will also make some recommendations based on where Leicester's unmet need might go. And that's based on, I suppose it's like almost a demographic approach to how you might consider redistributing Leicester's unmet need. And I think that'll be an important piece of evidence, particularly in the short term, in terms of, when I say short term, over the next sort of 10 years or so, because if we are going to move towards a more strategic site-based approach, that will need time to feed through. So that's the Housing and Economic Needs Assessment.
Question on that, if I may, through you, Chairman. So in order for this or any updates of any, say, Harborough and Melton who are, updating, so they need this to underpin their future local plans in order to go ahead with a new, looking at new housing numbers. So when will this all be completed? So do you know what I'm trying to say? Can they go ahead without this, or,
I mean, that would be the choice of the individual authorities, but it wouldn't be without huge risk on their part. I don't think, especially given where they're at in the process. That said, in terms of the Housing and Economic Needs Assessment work, I mentioned the Strategic Transport Assessment, and obviously ultimately this will feed into a Statement of Common Ground as well. We're working as fast as we can to hopefully get a Statement of Common Ground at least published early next year, which will be a huge challenge given the amount of work that's got to be done. And obviously alongside that, the evidence will need to be published as well. So we're not talking about there is a period of time, but it's not a hugely lengthy period of time. Hopefully, obviously, the decision making isn't in my hands. Of course, that's a matter for the elected members at the individual authorities. Numbers in the city. I think from what I've seen, Leicester have done actually a huge amount of work on this. I think all district authorities will be familiar with the local plan process, which is hugely lengthy, in depth, and requires a huge amount of work and evidence. And the city have done a huge amount of work so far on their capacity and continue to do that. The bar is incredibly high. Not just obviously it can cause political tensions, but the ultimate test for the city is a planning one. And to get through a local plan examination, they last for best part of a year if you've got a fair wind behind you. They are hugely detailed. They're going to need to demonstrate, and they know this, that they've left no stone unturned if they're not going to be able to meet their housing need. And through that process, they've got to have a lot of evidence to underpin that, and they've done a huge amount of work so far. Way more than other authorities would do in the local planning process, because most authorities the authorities in Leicester meet their own need traditionally. So there is a lot of work to do there. What I would say on that is we've got to bear in mind we're a housing market area as a whole, which up to 2036 has got to accommodate what, 85,000 homes. If the city went away and did, they could do a number of years worth of work, and let's say they found 1,000 or a couple of thousand more homes in the grand context of things. It wouldn't be a huge strategic issue, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I know it sounds a lot of homes, but over the area as a whole, and over the timescales that we're talking about, we're never going to get to a point where you have a precise figure that stays the same, because housing supply in all authorities, including the districts, is dynamic. Your 5-year supply or your housing supply in your local plans, it changes and evolves all the time based on global market conditions all the way down to local site specific ones. So I think it's important to bear that in mind, and the longer it takes for the city to deal with this issue, the more difficulty it creates for individual authorities in terms of progressing local plans as well, because if the goalposts move at the last minute, it makes things incredibly challenging.
Revisions of the planning policies and design code of conduct, what effects, potential effects could that have?
Again, well, the government's going to publish its response to the white paper, hopefully in the autumn, although it has slipped a few times. I think that will be the first window that we get into seeing what the government has in store for us in terms of its reform of the planning system. So I can't really answer specifically on that.
But that needs to be, will that need to be worked, or anything that comes out to make a local plan more sustainable within, you know, the existing ones, or is that, is it just up in the air?
I think, I mean, my personal view is there'll probably be some sort of transitional arrangements put in place from the current system to the new one. And that's just a personal view. I don't have any sort of evidence on that. So it'll be a matter of waiting to see, I think, what happens.
Logistics,
as you know, Mrs. Page, it's a hugely challenging sector to plan for. I think what I'd say about it is one of the reasons why it's so challenging is because it doesn't operate over traditional local authority scales or boundaries. For most sectors, you can work out what the need is for a district or another area in terms of other employment uses, also in terms of housing. But because that sector operates over, and I think the study talks about the market operates over 21 authorities from Milton Keynes to Birmingham across to Nottingham. That's why it's so challenging for us as a group of authorities to plan for it, because they can locate effectively when they're looking for locations, that they will look in a very wide area, which is why you can sometimes get a focus in certain areas more than others.
And now your thoughts on my carbon comments.
So in terms of the zero carbon, that I think in terms of climate change in general, I think it's fair to say local plans have grappled with this issue, but it's extremely challenging because the government wouldn't allow us to set our own local standards. And I think they're starting to look at that a little bit, but to be honest, a lot of the control in terms of specific building standards remains at the national level. That is a challenge for local plans, but that said, I think the way that planning can have an impact on climate changes in terms of it has the ability to determine where you locate development. So you can locate development in locations or plan developments in ways that minimise the impact on climate change. That's what planning has the ability to really influence, and obviously on the design of specific developments as well. To be honest, it's not a new thing to planning. Climate change has been at the heart of the planning system for many years now, and one of the reasons why local plans locate growth in close to larger settlements that's because where a lot of the jobs and services and facilities are, where the commercially viable public transport routes are, etc. So planning is not the silver bullet to climate change, but in my view, but it does have a role to play. And our hands are we're restricted to certain things that we can do. But my personal view is that affecting the locations of development is one of the big ways that it can impact.
And to finish off, just your thought, how do you feel, or say my idea is for the MAC to agree some common policies on carbon and environment and put it all in the local plans. So every local plan would have the same policy. Would that then stand up more solid in the eyes of the inspector to enforce it as a Leicestershire policy? You know, just a thought.
I can see what you mean about around the consistency point. I think what we need to bear in mind is that MAG, it's a vehicle for the duty to cooperate. It's not a decision-making body, so it can't embed policies into individual authorities' local plans if they don't want to. That's a matter for the individual authorities themselves. It could do some evidence on that, and that could help inform local policies. But as to whether it gives it more clout or not, I suppose, if it's in a development plan, whether it's a local plan or if it's in a development plan policy, then I suppose that's where it gets its power from. Whether it's in one authority's local plan, whether it's in all authorities' local plans, obviously it only applies to the geographic area of that plan there.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Barclay.
Thank you. I wouldn't prepare. I wouldn't purport to be an expert on planning, but I have to say, Mr. Richardson's comments, given there's probably hundreds of moving parts in the planning application, it's hugely complex. And I think one thing that has become clear is all that can be done is being done. It's certainly not easy to achieve what the government wants to do, and it is not made any easier when laid on top of that we suddenly have a planning reform coming through which could change many things, but fundamentally the underlying basics remain the same. And I take some comfort from the fact that all the issues that are there are being addressed, are being thought about. The solution is certainly not easy, but I think working together is the only way to come anywhere near trying to resolve this problem. What is frustrating is, I think, suddenly allocating 35% more housing to an area, knowing very well that they can't meet that need. That just doesn't seem that is not helpful. But leaving all that aside, we still have so many variables in there: population growth, employment, huge amounts carbon neutral. But there is no other way, in my mind, other than cooperating together and trying to come to a solution. And clearly, in various districts, that's not going to be helpful because they're going to have to achieve more growth. But given the time scale it takes to develop a local plan, which is about 7 years, we're probably talking about the period of time we're talking about. There will probably be a new local plan with new numbers coming through within 5 years. So it is immensely complicated, but I really do feel that everything is being considered, that everything that can be done is being done. And I'm quite sure that if it comes back here and there is something we spot that needs addressing, we will do it. But thank you, Chair.
Does any other member have any questions, comments on this item? No? Okay. Well, thank you to Rob and to Sharon and Simon and Tom and Mr. Brecken for attending for this item. Do any of you have any comments?
Chair, could we just clarify when they might all be back to tell us the outcome of this work? Refers to a further report coming here. Could we, don't want to hold anyone, but could we put a timescale on that so at least it can be put in our work plan?
Yeah, in terms of timescales for the partnership, I guess it'll be when this work's published, hopefully early in the new year. I would imagine, and officers at the county will correct me, I'm sure, that once it will go through to MAG, and then it will be a matter for all the authorities to to either approve or not, I suppose. And at that point, it will go through the county council's usual processes for this type of work. So it would be sometime in the new year, I would have thought, but it depends on the internal process of the county.
Thank you. Does anybody have any further comments that they want to make? No? Okay, well, thank you very much to everybody for participating today. It's been a very productive meeting. Item 13 is the date of the next meeting. Can members note the next meeting is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the 17th of November 2021. The meeting will start at 10 AM and a revised meeting invite will be sent to you shortly. Item 14, I'm advised there's no urgent items, so thank you again to everybody for attending and participating today, and I close the meeting.